So it looks like everyone is here. It's 8 o'clock. I'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. The Whatcom County PUD regular meeting of January 26, 2021. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I think, Christine, you're going to do that. And I'm going to go on mute.
Okay. Are we going to put a flag up? Okay. Should I start right now, or are we going to put the flag up?
Mike, can you get us a flag? There we go.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
I think the.
Thank you, Christine.
Thanks.
So the agenda today, is there any comments on today's agenda? Any changes or amendments to today's agenda?
I don't see any L2. All looks good.
So I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as it reads.
I have a second.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the motion carries. Let's move on to the consent agenda. So we have the minutes from our last meeting, as well as the claims of January 26th. And are there any comments on the minutes or the claims?
Commissioner Tishmani just had one error on the meeting minutes. I dated it 2020, so that was corrected to January 2021.
Okay, yeah, it's important, Ann, that we put 2020 behind us.
That's just good hindsight. Hindsight's perfect if it's 2020.
That's right. Does that mean that we should approve them separately, or you think that's minor enough we can just approve the claims of the claims and the minutes together? Consent agenda.
You can approve together
Okay. Well,
with
then
that correction.
With that correction, I'll ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as with the changes of the date, the year, I mean.
And I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. And now let's move on to old business.
Commissioners, I didn't have anything. I will have an update under the general manager's report.
Yeah, there was, just to repeat again, we did have a special meeting last week where we talked about telecom issues. There was no intention for actions in that meeting, and of course none were taken. And it was for the benefit of the commission to discuss telecom, but there was no actions or agenda items out of that yet. And so with that, let's move on to new business. So who's going to take the first one? Is that Brian?
Brian?
Thank you, Brian.
Good morning, commissioners.
Morning.
As we've discussed in the past, staff has been busy reaching out to both utility organizations and consultants that might assist us going into the future with issues and education regarding energy supply management and acquisition of new resources. We've been doing this work because, as you're aware, the PUD has used its allocation of Tier 1 power from Bonneville, and also our energy load forecast shows we'll need to acquire additional megawatts of power in the next few years. So with that, one of the organizations that we've approached, and in fact we have applied for membership in, is Northwest Requirements Utilities. They're a utility organization based in Portland, Oregon, and they represent over 50 public utilities in the Northwest And it's an interesting group of PUDs, cooperative utilities, and municipal utilities. And NRU, as an advocacy group, represents these utilities in mainly matters involving the Bonneville Power Administration, taking positions on both power and transmission issues. And NRU is also an active participant in Bonneville's biannual rate cases. So they weigh in on members' interests with regard to setting both power and transmission rates. So along with membership in NRU, which we haven't been formally accepted as a member yet. However, I've been told informally that a brief poll of their membership, we would be welcomed into the organization. Their executive board just needs to take a vote, and then we are accepted as a member. But along with membership in NRU, we have available to us membership in another organization called the Northwest Intergovernmental Energy Supply Group, or Nies. This group is affiliated with NRU. In fact, there is a direct link between NRU and NIES in that members in NRU can elect to become a member of NIES. And this organization is important to Whatcom PUD because it's the resource arm of MRU. In other words, if with membership in NIES, the PUD can participate in investigations in new energy resources. And also we can participate jointly with other participating members in resource acquisition. So it's a way to take a look at new resources and then actually acquire new resources and share, a certain amount of the common costs with both the investigations and the acquisition. So it's a way to share costs and a way to share risk. So what you have before you today are two agreements. The first one is the NIES membership agreement, and it's just a simple membership agreement. The only obligation once that agreement's signed is to pay your share of the annual dues of the organization, the common administrative cost that organization incurs. For calendar year 2021, those dues are approximately $13,000 to be a member of NIES. The second agreement is a requirement. If we sign up to become a member of NIES, we're also required to sign what we call the JARPA, which is the Joint Resource Planning and Acquisition Agreement. This agreement is the one that has the meat on the bones and basically is an enabling agreement that then allows us to participate in resource investigations or resource acquisitions. Initially, our only financial obligation under this JARPA agreement is the annual dues of NIS, of NIES. So there's no addition, signing this agreement that we don't have additional costs on top of the annual dues of NIES. Should we sign up for the JARPA and then want to participate in a resource investigation, let's say, we then additionally share the costs that NIES incurs in doing the study of that new resource. So that becomes sort of that path for financial obligation. And I will say right here, things are happening quite fast because NIES is actually looking at participation in the Tucci solar project that's being sponsored by Energy Northwest. They already have several of their members electing to participate in investigating, doing due diligence on that resource. And so if we sign up and become a member of NRU and sign the NIES agreements, we then would have the opportunity to sign up to be a participant in that investigation of Tucci solar project. The alternative would be we could proceed on our own path and do our own investigation of that solar project independent of NIES. It's voluntary participation. You're in or out. You don't have to actually participate. So I think with that, I'll stop and see if there's any question. I know there's sort of a confusing number of organizations and acronyms involved with these agreements. So I'd be glad to explain anything further that you'd like. Yes, Commissioner Murphy.
Are you saying that we're already a member of the Northwest Requirements Utilities or not?
We are not. We're not formally a member yet. We've actually submitted a letter of interest and filled out their application form, but we have not become a member. But the other agreements associated with NRU, we would not execute until we were formally a member of NRU. Today, we're just asking for approval to sign, but we would hold off signing until we're a member.
So it doesn't say here that we are going to approve becoming members of NRU. Should we do that as a first amendment and then follow the other two? Or do we just skip the NRU and go right to Nies and the joint resource planning?
Commissioner, we hadn't asked for approval of joining NRU only because there's no underlying agreement. There's no membership agreement in NRU itself. And it's merely agreeing to pay the annual dues. So.
And my last question, I'll turn it over to the other commissioners, is the 13,000 based on something about us, our revenue or something? How do they come up with 13,000?
Yeah, NRU is like other utility organizations, and NIS is likewise. The members share the cost of the organization. Those costs are allocated in this case based on a formula that includes your number of customers, your annual electric load, and in the case of Nies, it's your allocation of Bonneville Tier 1 power compared to the other members of the group. So you're paying a proportionate share of the overall cost of that organization. Quite similar, the same type of formula we use for the Washington PUD Association, same type of formula that the Public Power Council uses.
Thank you.
Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's a sort of a size limit for new resources. Could they help with smaller projects, or is there a threshold?
I would say the only threshold for resource acquisition because of scheduling and the way the utility system works is 1 megawatt would be sort of the minimum. They don't have any established. We'll only look at projects that are 5 or 25, whatever. It's in the case, using as an example, the Tucci solar project, NIES is looking at the members that want to participate, and each member has told them how much resource they would like to acquire. Mm-hmm. So they are aggregating that total.
Okay. And my last question is, it looks like we need a member representative if we join. Have we thought about who that would be? We have not. And one thing I will say, and this is not, it's the commission's decision, obviously, that this organization tends to be dominated by general managers or staff to the utilities rather than, for example, the Washington PUD Association is really a commissioner-driven organization.
NRU and Nies doesn't seem to take that same approach. That doesn't preclude a commissioner from being the representative. But
Brian, could you elaborate a little bit further on the potential for NIES in Tucci?
yes, NIES submitted a letter of interest, just like we did, to Energy Northwest last year for participation in the project. NIS actually, there's another group that we haven't mentioned. It's called NIMS. I love it. You know, the electric utility industry is just chock full of acronyms, but NIMS is the Northwest Energy Management Services. And they're actually the working arm of NIES. They're the ones that explore these new resource opportunities. They sit at the table and negotiate power supply contracts, will manage those contracts for the utility members. So NIMS, Nies and NIMS approached Energy Northwest and said, we want a piece of that project. We want to negotiate an agreement with the underlying project developer. So if we were to move forward as part of that NIES group, looking at the Tucci Energy project, NIMS, Blake Weathers being the director of NIMS, would represent us in any negotiations with the developer. So we don't have to spend the time or effort sitting at the table and negotiating terms. We basically tell NIES what we're looking for, how much resource, and what kind of contract terms that we would like to see. If we got to the point of actual resource acquisition, we have to sign a resource agreement with NIES. That then obligates us to our share of the cost of that resource. So that's a further step. We have no obligation to purchase until we sign a resource acquisition agreement. Also, if we want to, as I mentioned earlier, participate in the NIES investigation of the Tucci project, we have to sign a special resource investigation agreement, so we bear our share of those costs. So it's kind of a step-by-step progression. We take a look at the resource and then decide if we want to go to the next step and be a purchaser of output.
So I have a question, Brian. One of the things that, as a PUD, we're talking about here is becoming increasingly prepared for steps away from supply of Bonneville. There's a technical aspect to that, but there's also a cultural aspect to that. And obviously Bonneville has done tremendous, the project of the dams has done tremendous for, is a foundation of our Northwest industrial economy. However, organizations and agencies that are affiliated with Bonneville may not be able to see some of the opportunities that are presenting themselves, which are very independent of Bonneville. And why I'm asked, so my question is, are there other organizations that may help us explore pathways for supply that are independent of, more independent of Bonneville and the PUD community even, that might help us explore what's out there that these folks would naturally derate or not necessarily notice? Let me talk about two things that are of interest to me. One is projects and potentials for supply of power from Canada. And the other is projects for production of power that are outside the BPA grid, meaning potentially regional projects for supply. And what I'm saying is, so things that aren't on those main power distribution corridors, is what I'm referring to. but still may be accessible and affordable to us. So I guess these are the questions that I'm asking. How do we plan to explore opportunities like that? And are we exploring opportunities like that at present? And what are your thoughts? Would that be best done through independent explorations, or are there other entities that we can rely on to explore those other pathways? Thank you.
Commissioner, a couple of thoughts on that. Number one, NIES is looking at non-federal resources, non-Bonneville resources, and has not restricted itself on what that resource might be or where that resource might be located. And they rely on member input to tell them where to go in terms of where to look for resources. Or they'll come up with a resource opportunity, bring it to membership. It can work the other way. We as a PUD could go out and identify a viable resource that we'd like to go after and do it independent of NIS, or we could bring it into NIS and see if other members want to participate in that resource and share in those resource costs. So I wouldn't preclude NIS from that pool of expertise that we can rely on. The other is the other organization that we have contacted, and we'll be making a presentation on February 9th, the Energy Authority clearly has experience in looking at the wide variety of resources on and off the Bonneville grid. So they're very familiar with transactions with PowerX and BC Hydro, as well as the California energy market and securing surplus renewables, if that was our choice to go after. So those are two. There are others out there, but those are the two that we've brought forth so far.
Thank you. That really completely answers my question. And there's some subtext to your answer, but just to clarify what I think you were saying for the benefit of the public is that both NIES and PowerX have the ability to go outside of Bonneville, and in particular PowerX has lots of experience doing so. And respond on my side, Brian. It's a wonderful resource we have in this public park community to take advantage of. And I'm in no way diminishing that. And I also recognize that progress has to be somewhat stepwise. So it's wonderful that we've got a group of people that can help us make that progress and reduce our risk, because this is not something we've actually done before as an organization. So Commissioner saw that as the opportunity with NIES. It might be a way to sort of stick your toe in the water, test the water with a smaller acquisition resource. And then an organization like TEA, the Energy Authority, if we start, we're looking at that significant load growth out in the future, they may be the organization that help us, acquire a much larger resource and manage that resource. And I'd like to personally thank you, Brian, for developing these pathways and solutions. I think that what you're bringing to the table, a pragmatic approach to expand our supply options, is really, really important. And it seems to me that the steps that you're taking in that direction or advising the commission are sound.
Can I ask just one more question?
Yes, go ahead, Christine.
So I just want to make sure, and thank you, Brian. Brian gave me a whole description last night of the difference between NRU, NIES, and NEMS. If you want to forward that to the other commissioners, I found it very helpful. Thanks, Brian.
I would love that, yeah.
So excited that we'll be hearing from the Energy Authority. Is the Energy Authority going to be almost like a competitor to NIES, or could they be working collaboratively? Can you explain, because would they be helping us with resource acquisition, or are they advising us to join NIES? Can you just explain a little bit more about our relationship with the Energy Authority and how it relates to this contract? or
That's a good
agreement?
question.
Okay,
TEA did not direct us to NIS, but
okay,
TEA is a different animal. I guess where I'd contrast, NIS has used TEA services in the past for other resources. NIS is a contract negotiation and contract management group. They don't have a 24-hour trading floor. They can't provide 24/7 operational assistance. So that's kind of the difference. TEA actually can go to that level and they can provide you, if we acquired, so for example, a variable renewable resource, they can actually provide the support hour by hour to manage that resource. So they're much more sophisticated than NIS and are staffed, for that real-time type of operation, type of trading. So they can work together or separately. So
thank you. That's helpful.
and to add to that, if NIS was to acquire a portion of the Tucci solar project, I would fully expect they'd go out and perhaps retain TEA to manage that resource, because we have to take that variable energy and create a block. And that's an hour by hour thing. So.
Any further questions for Brian on this agenda item? So I'd
None.
like to ask for a motion to approve the Northwest Intergovernmental Energy Supply Agreements.
I'll make the motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve the Northwest Intergovernmental Energy Supply Agreements and authorize district's general manager to execute the 2 agreements.
Christine, could I make an addition to your motion?
Of course.
That the annual dues for 2021 are 13,000 and we approve that too?
Yes. Should I say
I
the
se-
whole thing again?
No, no need to. I'll just second it.
Okay.
And you okay with that?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. So all those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
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 The motion carries. So the next item under new business is the award of bid for the industrial water project connection. Steve, you gonna do that, or?
Commissioners, I'll start out with this and then hand it over to Dwayne. I think Dwayne can take the actual results of the bid. But I think I apologize, we're getting some echo here. I don't know.
Maybe people can mute.
Yeah, people just need to mute while people are talking.
Yeah. Okay, I think there's a couple of questions that would arise on this project. Is first of all, what is it? And secondly, why are we doing it? What it is really creating the actual infrastructure to move Healthy Pet off of our Grandview potable system. They use approximately 40% of all the water consumed on average on a daily basis for their processing at their facility. And that is coming out of our well at Grandview, and of course is utilizing our storage, potable storage, and our potable system to supply that. And as we started processing our water supply plan update, we of course have to look at our capacity of our potable system to provide service to all of our customers that are on that system over the next 20 years. And we identified a significant gap in terms of the capacity long-term for the potable system to deliver the amount of water that's being consumed and would be consumed over the next 20 years without making significant improvements to that potable system. For instance, increased storage as well as increased capacity of the well. And so we looked at our major customers in terms of consumption out of Grandview and said, are there some customers that we can move off the potable system and have them take industrial water supply? And Healthy Pet being, the main consumer out at Grandview, we started working with them. Dwayne and Brian started working with them well over a year ago and talked about the possibility of moving them off of the potable system and onto the industrial system. And once we made the connection with our new Vista Road pipeline connecting our industrial system out to our fire hydrant system in Grandview, we saw an opportunity to do that. Then we started working with our engineers and Healthy Pet to design that, the infrastructure, the movement to the industrial supply, and came up with some cost estimates. And we weighed those cost estimates of doing this with the potential of having to actually double the size of our storage out at Grandview and increase the capacity of our well. And we said, it would be much more financially beneficial to the Grandview system and to the PUD if we would assume the cost of making this transfer over. And working with Healthy Pet, they agreed to move to the industrial supply system if we would pick up the cost of doing this. So with that, we put dollars in our budget for this year for the Grandview system to make this changeover. And then I'll turn it over to Dwayne and talk about the bids that he was able to get and working with our engineers and Healthy Pet. So.
Hi, good morning. So as Steve said, we had the engineers design the reconnection, reconfiguration, should I say. And we went out to bid through our small works roster. And we received on January 19th, we received 3 bids as shows below there. The engineer's estimate was $92,225. The low bid was PMP Excavating at $65,932.20. He was the low bid. As you can see, it's quite a bit lower than a couple of the others. So afterwards, just kind of doing some due diligence, I called Tom and I said, do you want to look at your numbers to make sure? Not that we can adjust them, of course, but just to make sure he feels confident he can do it for that amount. He said, yeah. He said he was good with those numbers. And actually, the amount that he did isn't terribly far off what we had initially been thinking. And so I think we're good to go. And so if you would approve the bid for $65,932.20 to PMP Construction to allow Steve to sign it.
Go ahead, Mike. I think Mike has a question.
Dwayne, did you hear me, Dwayne?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
I see your engineer estimate compared to what the PMP Excavating was coming in at. I'm always concerned about change orders. You know me. And so I'm curious, are they missing something? Like, is there going to be some pretty heavy change orders coming down because the engineer's estimate noticed something that the contractor didn't, and they will come back to us and ask us for a change order?
Well, on this, Mike, I always say never, but we do work a lot with PMP Construction, and Tom is very familiar with a lot of our system. And that's why after the bid, with it being this much lower, that's why I called him and said, Tom, you want to look things over again, which he did. And he got back to me and said, no, I feel confident we can do this. So no, I don't foresee any big changes. It's a pretty simple project, actually. But again, I'll never say never, but we always do our best to keep those to a minimum.
No, and I appreciate all the work you do and the others do to keep, these bids as tight as we can and without a lot of change orders. So thank you, Dwayne. Steve, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Because it's been brought up, I think it's great that moving Healthy Pet over to the other system is great, but it also reads here that it prolongs costly upgrades to the Grandview potable water, but it also opens up for new customers to be put onto that. Not that we have to go into a lot of talking, but before you add any more customers onto that failing system, or that system needs a lot of money spent on it, would we as commissioners be open to discussing that before you start putting more people on it? Eventually, we're gonna have to upgrade that system or come up with a solution. And I'd prefer not to spend money on a system that we may in the future have to shut down.
Well, this, Commissioner, thanks for those questions or concerns. This really isn't about that potable system failing. It's when we go through our water system plan update, we have to do an analysis. We have to show the Department of Health that we have the capacity, both in pumping capacity and water right capacity, as well as storage, basically system capacity to deliver the amount of water that we're saying that we will, based upon the potable system plan that the health department has to approve. So this isn't about dealing with a failing system or a system that is, has lost its capacity. It's about looking forward and saying to the Department of Health, based upon the storage capacity, based upon the pumping capacity, we think we can deliver over the next 20 years the amount of potable water that is needed out there. The health department is only concerned about the potable system, the drinking water. And so when we looked at trying to provide the amount of water that including Healthy Pets take, we simply did not have that quote proven capacity to deliver. And so what would happen is if we went to the health department today, the state health department, with this water system plan update, they would come back to us and to the county and say, you can't have any more connections to that potable system unless you do something in terms of increasing pumping and storage capacity. So that's when we look back at the, a Healthy Pet, in this case, taking almost 40% of the daily consumption in that system and said, okay, how can we lower that demand? And basically what it does is it extends the time that we will have to increase those capacities, pumping and storage, some 20 some years, based upon assumption of new connections just for potable in the system. So it's not looking at this as a failing system. It's really looking at it as just saying, okay, are there customers out there that take a lot of water but don't need potable water? And so it's just extending the time some 20 years. What we'll have to do now is, once we make this connection, we'll have to take about a good month and look at the drop in consumption off of our potable system before we can then finalize our water system plan and get it to the state.
Thank you, Steve. Maybe a choice of poor words on my part by using the word failing, but I do know it's a system that we probably will have to address, even if it's 20 years down the road. But I almost would like to, maybe with the other commissioners someday in the future, talk about the future of Grandview and maybe talk about moving all the water needs away from wells at Grandview and tying it into our system out there, and maybe spend the money on a potable water connection in the future. But it's a down the road conversation.
Well, Commissioner, that's a good point. In our discussion, staff with engineers over the last year or so, looking at this project, we've looked at just doing that. And one opportunity would be to make a connection from our potable system to our Vista road line, our industrial system, and then put in a small potable package treatment plant at Grandview. And then you're using that industrial water supply to feed that water treatment plant, and you don't have to worry about capacity at that point. So that is something that we will probably be looking at with you over the next few years.
So a clarifying question, assuming that we make this change with regards to Healthy Pet, what is our next forecasted maintenance or upgrade of significant, to a significant degree for the Grandview water system?
Right now, Commissioner, in our 5-year capital budget for Grandview, we only have just general maintenance and upkeep. We don't have any large capital investment projected over the next 5 years. But I do think that once we get Healthy Pet, on their industrial system, and we get the water supply or water system plan update completed, I think that next year we need to start looking at just the thing that Commissioner Murphy brought up, and looking at longer term. The other is that I think that as we move ahead, as the economy hopefully will start picking back up, we're going to see additional development opportunities at Grandview, both in our service area and adjacent service, water association service areas, that I think that we'll have an opportunity to look at a much larger service area out there, and working with the adjacent water associations to see if there are opportunities to consolidate. So I think that 2022 will be an opportunity to start working with with other associations on that. And I think we're going to see some increase in development in our service area, our current service area at Grandview, especially the areas along I-5. So.
Do we know anything about the current occupancy rate at Grandview? Just thinking about that issue of development and where things might go over the next few years.
Commissioner, I can't say that I have a good solid projection. The last 2 to 3 years we've had opportunities where developers have come forward and had I would call it fairly serious discussions with the PUD about and the city of Ferndale, and areas that have been annexed by the city, especially that open area right along I-5 on the west side of I-5. That large, but we don't. We're usually the last to hear about interest, real or not, by a developer. We'll get a call from the city, or we'll get a call from the developer and say, oh, we've been meeting with, and so other than that, I don't have any expectation. Now, one of our current customers in Grandview's service area right now has been talking with us about expanding in just across Delta Line Road for expansion of one of their businesses there. But other than that, no, I don't have any.
And we do have Method Homes is just connected, and they're the ones building that large steel building out in the Northgate side right now.
Yeah.
Dwayne?
And we've had discussion with adjacent water associations. One of the mobile home park, which is not currently on, is not currently connected to us. We've had some discussions with them over the last couple of years about connecting us to us and us operating that system. And as we've worked through the coordinated water system plan with the Whatcom County, you know, over the last few years, there's always talk about making those, you know, interties with those water associations and managing them. But we have not gone out and encouraged any of that consolidation or intertie.
Dwayne, did you have something you're going to add?
Yeah, I was just saying that Method Homes has recently connected to us, and that's that large metal structure in the Northgate side.
Okay, I just want perhaps a final clarification is that it a subtext of this work is the approval of our hopeful timely, quick approval of our water supply plan. And why that's so important is because we're looking at an adjudication. And the more cemented all of our plans are, the less subject to scrutiny we are about our water rights, plans for utilization of water. So I just want to clarify that that's a big factor in why it's important we proceed with this work. Any further comments? Okay, well, I'll entertain a motion to approve the bid, award the bid for the industrial water project connection.
I will make a motion that we award the bid to PNP Excavating for the amount of $65,932. I'm not worried about the 20 cents. And authorize the manager to move on this.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
Okay, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. So next item on new business is the Open Public Meetings Act training. And John, you're going to take the.
Yes, and commissioners, this is probably about an hour or so, depending on questions. And maybe I should have thought of this at the beginning of the agenda. I wonder if you want to defer that to later in the agenda to allow the reports and then the public comment. So if there are public comments, they're not waiting through this. Maybe they want to hear it too, which is just fine. But just a consideration for you. And then if you want to, whenever you want to proceed, I was going to ask if you wanted to take a break before you sit down and hear the baritone for an hour.
Sir, is there any objection to a change in the agenda to move the Open Public Meetings Act and Public Records Training to after item number 8, public comment in our agenda?
None for me.
Altool?
Yes.
I need to ask John. John, one of the things that we did in the beginning of the meeting was to approve the agenda as it reads, and now we're going to make a change.
And that's fine. You can make that change midstream. You all approved it. If someone wants to move to amend it this time, that's fine.
I'm okay with it.
It's just an order. It's not a new substantive matter. So no commissioners surprised by the topic.
Great. I'm all for it, Altool.
Okay. Great. So let's just make that change. I don't think we need a motion for that. We will address the Open Public Meetings Act and Public Records Training after public comment. So then with that, let's move on to our next major item, which is a general manager report. Steve, did I catch you off guard?
Commissioners, the only thing I had was just a brief update after the meeting in the first meeting in January, and then a follow-up discussion on broadband at last week. There was direction by the commission to have Commissioner Murphy and I meet and start discussing and developing a report back to you all on, on the action on the broadband issue. And Commissioner Murphy and I did meet last week. It was a good 2-hour meeting, and I'm at his direction and his request. I'm developing a set of recommendations that will come back to you on February 9th at the next regular meeting regarding staffing and budget issues that Commissioner Murphy has raised concerns about. And Commissioner Murphy and I are meeting again this coming week to go over that draft, and hopefully we'll get that out to you in a couple of weeks in preparation for the February 9th meeting. So the only other thing I had was we are monitoring several bills at the legislature, and a couple of them on water issues that at this time, I don't believe that either of those bills that I'm monitoring would impact us directly. They may impact, if they are modified with some of the language that, especially that's in one of them, it may impact agricultural water use in the county, but would not impact us directly. One of the bills does talk about a new set of guidelines for setting up water banking, and we're monitoring that along with PUD Association. And I believe that Commissioner Grant might talk today about a bill that would provide retail broadband authority to PUDs. So that's all I had, Commissioner.
Thank you. So with that address all the general manager comments then, because I guess may have some follow-up conversation under the commissioner reports. Something Steve, we also want to make sure we let Christine and Dwayne give a little bit more, let us know a little bit more about themselves in a getting to know you fashion. And I'm wondering, are we planning to do that under commissioner reports? Is that what you had in mind, or did we not put that on the agenda?
I didn't specifically have it on the agenda, but that's where I thought that we would have that opportunity, Commissioner.
So with that, I'd like to take a little bit of clarification, if it's okay with the other commissioners, and ask Dwayne to go first, and then let the commissioners take the ball from there. Is that fine with everyone? Okay, Dwayne, yeah, tell us about yourself.
My name's Dwayne Holden. I was born and raised in Burlington, just down the road. Went to Burlington Edison High School. I've been in construction of some sort or another for about 35 years. I mostly built custom homes or homes, designed them and permitted them and built them. That's still kind of a hobby, passion of mine, I guess. I don't know. I just enjoy building things. I worked for Department of Transportation from 1999 to 2006 for about 7.5 years as a construction inspector on the freeways and bridges and things like that. Then went back off on my own building houses for a little while with my wife. Came to the PUD here in 2009. So I've been here just about 12 years here in a couple weeks. We've started here as a project manager, and now I director of operations. I work with the water ops guys, the electric guys, the IT guys, and the project manager. We try and get all of our projects and maintenance done in a timely, costly manner. My wife and I love to build houses and vacation. As far as my building experience, I built big houses, little houses, We've done everything from foundations to excavation to utilities and commercial buildings, which I think helped when we did the construction here of the large Plant 2 upgrade, having experience in that. PUD is an amazing family here. We've got great employees, great management, and we really appreciate the great commission, but we really appreciate all the help you guys give us and all the support with what we do. So I don't know, I'm open to questions, I guess, if anybody has any other questions.
So what was your most positive experience in 2020 and try to put a positive light on it?
Oh, right as the pandemic was starting and nobody knew what was happening yet. And before things got shut down, I got to go to Mexico with my 24-year-old son for 5 days. And then we came back and everything got shut down. So as far as 2020, it was pretty limited.
You were very grateful for that trip. Where'd you go in Mexico?
We went to Cabo. It was just
Cool.
it was actually a last minute deal. He had a few days off and I got a few days off and I got to spend a few days with my son down in Mexico.
So you're living the good life. Your kids are grown now and enjoying all the good parts of it. Any grandkids yet?
I have a 25-year-old son who works at Petrogas here in Ferndale, and he's just bought a house here in Ferndale. And then my wife has a 35-year-old son that manages a seafood plant in Sitka, Alaska, and then another son that works for IMCO as a project manager. He's almost 34.
Great. It's great to know more about you.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Chief.
One of the things that Dwayne brings to the PUD family is his ability to apply pragmatic approaches to getting things done, and his ability to work with contractors, engineers, our own staff, our water operators, our electric systems operators, just a person that knows how to work with people to get something done. And I think that our staff really recognizes that Dwayne brings that to us. And I think his experience with working with Department of Transportation all those years, I think has really brought a benefit to us in terms of working with WashDOT on permitting and working with contractors and so forth. So couldn't say enough about what Dwayne has brought to the PUD.
Thank you, Dwayne. So next, let's go on to commissioner reports. But before we get into that, really, could we hear more from Christine, because we cut you off in the last regular meeting?
Okay, yeah. So thanks, Commissioner Deshmani, for initiating this. It's really nice to get to know each other better when we're all separated. And I did just want to say thanks to Dwayne too. I think you're the staff person I've spent the most time with, because you took me to all the different PUD facilities back in December. So I really appreciate the time you spent with me, Dwayne. And so Anne, I decided I was going to do 3 pictures, 3 minutes to introduce who I am. I don't know if you're able to get those up, Anne. But basically, the first picture is from the year 2008. And this was one of my first sort of, I spent 12 years working as an environmental consultant with 2 different consulting firms in the Northwest. And mostly we designed and implemented policy related to resource conservation. And this was one of the weirder projects I worked on. We had a practice area that mainly worked on solid waste, and we characterized waste streams of municipalities all over the country. So this is in Hayward, California. I woke up at 4 a.m. every morning for a month and was out on the tipping floor, literally like measuring, analyzing, characterizing waste, entering data into that really old school tough book computer. I went on to mostly work in our energy practice area, but these waste characterization years were always kind of a fun part of my professional story. And I feel really lucky, you know, I have been able to have wonderful mentors and coworkers in a lot of the fields, the two consulting firms that I've worked with, and have worked all across the country with electric cooperatives, public and private utilities, cities like the city of Hayward, really helping them trying to meet their environmental goals mostly, but also save money. And so this is kind of the early years picture. The next slide is about my family. So if you want to know who I am, my family is a huge part of who I am. I told my daughter yesterday, I have to introduce myself to my new PUD friends. What should I tell them? And she said, well, you need to tell them that you have a 4-year-old, me, and you should also let them know that you work out of a tool shed. And so, yes, during the pandemic, I have been working out of our tool shed, which we quickly insulated and put a coat of white paint on. But, you know, with being home, having just a little bit of space helps. And I've lived in Washington my whole life. I have 2 brothers, my mom and dad, and brothers all live in Washington state. And we've kind of bounced between Whatcom County, King County, and Okanagan County since my parents moved here in the 70s. And so I think this is very sort of indicative of what the last year has been like. My husband did the Warby Parker, you know, try your glasses on at home thing, and we were just being goofy. So the 3 of us have spent a lot of time together, and I hope you get to meet them soon. That's Sean, my husband, and June, my daughter. And next slide is, this is my classroom at Western from last year. I like to go before class starts and look at my classroom. I've been teaching at Western for 5 years now, and my daughter wanted to come up with me. So this was just a few weeks before winter quarter of 2020 started last year, and I took a picture of her there. And I think that this is kind of about community. So being part of the Western community is great. I love being connected to the student population. And a big part of my life over the last few years has been volunteering with the task force, with a lot of other community initiatives, and the Carbon Hackathon event that I do every year at Western. And this is just a community that I love. And it's been hard over the last year being so disconnected. But I'm excited for us to, you know, be able to fill rooms again and be together. So there are my 3 slides, who I am.
Thanks so much, Christine. I appreciate how your daughter was a sober one in the second picture.
I know.
She was keeping it together for everybody.
She's very responsible.
Very responsible. I noticed that. Yeah. Okay, well, with that, let's move on to commissioner reports. Christine, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'll just keep going. So it's, you know, it's been a busy few weeks. I wanted to just say I'm part of WPUDA is doing a really great orientation for new commissioners. I have a mentor, and I'm doing some all-day training every month for a few months here. I'm hearing from commissioners all over the state, and it's been great. And I think one of the key things that stuck with me from the all-day training that we did, I think it was last week, was just the importance of safety and how commissioners feel such a responsibility for their staff and just making sure that everyone gets home safely. And a commissioner from Chelan talked a little bit about how they actually had a fatality a few years ago. So not to be, bring up a negative topic here, but it just made me, especially with the time of COVID, with COVID, just how important safety is and how getting home to our families is so important. But really grateful for our WPUDA membership and just all the resources there. And I'm getting the chance to interact with a lot of different commissioners. So really appreciating that. I have followed up with doing quite a few calls related to broadband. And one of the things I wanted to bring up in my commission report, I'm on the WPUDA Telecommunications Committee, and I wanted to talk about House Bill 1336, which is the Public Broadband Act. And so the idea, oh, thank you, Anne. Yeah, so this is about expanding unrestricted authority for public entities. So I think at the last meeting, we talked about currently PUDs cannot provide retail authority to end users except in very, very certain specific circumstances. And so this bill would allow kind of unrestricted authority. And so there's going to be a public hearing tomorrow, I believe, on this. And WPUDA is very supportive of this bill. And so I thought it could be good for us to consider a resolution in support of this bill. Steve, you might be able to jump in with some more specifics on how we might go about doing that, since that would be a first for me. But I definitely wanted to bring up how we might support House Bill 1336.
Let's do that. Let's have a quick, at least chat about that. With commissioner comments, I'd like to make a suggestion is that when a commissioner comes up with something that is potentially actionable, that we address it immediately so it doesn't get lost.
Okay.
So is that okay with you, Christine?
Absolutely.
Steve, what do you think about, has the PUD done resolutions in support of a particular bill, and what do you think about that? And John may have thoughts on that too.
Commissioners, I don't think we've done a resolution, but I don't think it really requires a resolution, but I think that a simple motion to support it and that we can send that message on to the PUD Association, George Kahn, but we can also send it to our legislators. And I think that we can use that to provide input virtually into the hearing process tomorrow.
So let's make that motion.
Okay. I can make it if that works.
Sure.
For everyone. Okay, so so Steve, just again, it would just be making a motion just in support of House Bill 1336.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to make a motion that the commission support House Bill 1336, the Public Broadband Act.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great.
We'll take care of that this afternoon.
Thank you, Steve. Please continue, Christine.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I was approached by a group of by a professor up at Western that works on a technical writing class in the English department, and a group of Western students is interested in putting together a social media strategy for the PUD, and they're working with several other public organizations doing similar efforts, and so we'll be Steve and I are going to be meeting with the students next week. So they, in a month or two, they might take a little bit of our time in a commission meeting and present the results of the strategy that they're putting together. And this would be, somewhat connected to the rebranding discussions and the website update. But we thought this was a great way to support the students and also learn a little bit about what some of our options could be in terms of how we're communicating with the public using social media. So we have a meeting scheduled, Steve and I do, with Gina to talk about next steps in terms of our relationship with the port. And I think that's all I've got for now.
Mike, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Atul. Going back to our January 12th meeting, one of the comments made by one of the citizens, Joe Witt, mentioned about using my name, seeing if I had, because I have interests in water conservation, there's a lot of work being done on soil regeneration in Whatcom County, and she encouraged me to get involved, which I appreciate very much, Jill, saying that. I'm learning is one thing, maybe my fellow commissioners feel it, is there's so much going on that we haven't been involved in, that sometimes we let things fall to the side. At least I've experienced that. And so because of Jill, she reminded me that we are PUD is very involved with NC. I don't know if you're familiar with NC. Okay, so I spoke to Daryl there and wanted to know just, where are we at? So he's going to talk to Rebecca and Steve about making a presentation to us. But over the years, probably 20 years, we have bought a lot of trees in Whatcom County along the streams. We have supported repairing streams, cleaning streams, getting rid of culverts. And I have no idea. I don't know if we put in over the 20 years, we might have bought 100,000 trees. I don't know. But I feel she reminded me of that. And I thought, boy, I better make connections again with NC and Dwayne. So we're probably going to hear from him or them in the future, just about where they're at and what's going on and how we've contributed to that. I did attend the WPUDA meeting, and tomorrow is an Energy Northwest meeting, so I'll be attending that. But I was interested in Jason Herbert did give us a report during the WPUDA meeting and said that they just received a $1.5 million grant from Clean Air. I thought that was great. They're planning to use in that. The Columbia, I guess, is doing had one of its best years in 2020 in the megawatts. They're working on a solar project. They have 300 acres. They're going to start out with 75 megawatts and turn that into 200 megawatts by 2022. And I'm sorry, I didn't get the location in Washington State where that was at. And then 2021, they're going to refuel the Columbia. And I've done that once before when I was on the board of directors with Energy Northwest. So that's quite involved project. The board doesn't do a lot except we purchase a lot of uranium to make that happen. So there's the waste and there's also the purchase of fuel. So it'll probably be an interesting conversation that we'll be getting involved with in 2021. That's it, O'Toole.
Commissioner O'Toole, you're muted.
Go ahead, Steve.
Just one comment, follow up with Commissioner Murphy's comment about NC. I believe we are having Daryl Gray from NC come to your meeting on February 23rd and make a presentation. So.
And I believe the Energy Northwest solar project that you're referring to is out in the Richland area.
Thank you, O'Toole.
Commissioner, yeah, that's the Tucci project.
That is the Tucci project, yeah.
And it's on Department of Energy land. And interesting enough, it's the only resource they can put on that land because there's minimal ground disturbance. It is on the nuclear reservation, so.
Great, so I'll go ahead. So I attended WPUDA meetings as well. So first I'll talk briefly about on the telecommunications front. I also was glad to hear more about the discussion on retail authority. There was a lunchtime speaker, Russ Elliott, the head of the broadband office. And that spawned further discussion at WPUDA, which actually dovetails with some emails that the commissioners have gotten from an activist in our community, John Humphreys. So I'll talk about those two issues together. The first is regarding the retail authority. I have had follow-up conversations with a couple of commissioners about concerns about the broadband office's really how strongly supported are they really of retail authority? Because it certainly seemed to us in the Q&A that followed Russ Elliott's presentation at lunch that he was very cautious in being supportive of retail authority. And I don't quite understand why. We've made it abundantly clear that the purpose of retail authority is to allow PUDs to have access and leverage in the conversation of creating broadband infrastructure, access to funding and leverage in service. And what's, as far as the response is, the only thing that Russ said that I can understand is that he's getting pressure from the telecom industry. But respectfully, Russ works for the governor and we work for the people. And we have to not forget that. And so I think that our resolution will help in that vein. And I think that we probably as a PUD community will have to be vigilant if we expect to pass that bill. It's going to need an all hands on deck type of approach. And even leadership at Wapouta are going to be getting the heat. So it's now, John, I will defer to you when we get to it. When we talk about public meetings, I'll come back and ask a question about what are the limits of commissioners in advocating for legislation, because there are very clear limits on that, but maybe that would be a great case to address in your presentation. Regarding
plan to do it a little bit. Yes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Regarding the email correspondence that's happened, there's been quite a bit of email correspondence initiated by John Humphreys to talk to the speed-related thresholds that were established last year, basically 150 megabits up and down by 2028, as far as an aspirational goal. And what it is just a goal in the legislation. There is no penalty for not complying with that goal, nor a reward for achieving that goal. It is truly a aspirational goal. But nonetheless, there's a few things to point out about that goal. That goal was passed in 2020. And in 2020, the prior goal was the federal goal, which is 25 megabits and 3 megabits. Now, if you follow this following math, and I'll help with the math, that our need for bandwidth increases 50% every year. The compounding of that 50% a year by 2028 is very substantial. I believe the number was 25. So if we multiply 25 by 25, I think it comes to be more like 625. So the point is that 150 megabits, and maybe someone can double check that number. Somebody do compound interest on 50% a year increase. I did it back of the envelope, so maybe we can. But if we use 25 as the baseline, we'll recognize that at 2028, it's a much larger number. And so it's not a very high goal. What's important to recognize about speed is that it's unlike rural electrification. This is the critical point I want to make. Yes, electricity has gone up, but not at the same rate that data needs are going up. Our consumption of data for an individual, the needs for consumption data for individuals is going up much faster than our electricity needs went up, and will continue to go up. There's no end in sight for the increased data consumption needs of the public, at least not at the present time. So it's important that we need to have policy that not just addresses getting over a particular threshold today or tomorrow, but a policy and practices that support long-term increase of data for the average person. And technologically, the only infrastructure that seems to be able to deliver that is fiber. And that's not based on projections or what scientists are saying, it's based on history. Because of advances, repeated innovations and advances in pushing more data down the same fiber optic strand, fiber has been able to deliver exponential increase in the amount of data that's being delivered with a very modest increase, or in some cases, a decrease in the energy consumption associated with the data that's being transmitted. And for that reason, I think we need to stay very focused on fiber as our policy instrument. Some of the other interesting thoughts that have come forward is that the 150 megabyte symmetric upload download target for 2028 is also a target that is not clearly demarcated in terms of how one confirms compliance with that. For example, the method for testing we talked about in our last special meeting and at the last general meeting, that the speed test methods we use in the currently are insufficient or inappropriate in many cases to be able to actually quantify an individual user's data rates. Another issue is the timing of when that particular user is having that rate of data is also not specified. There's another issue called latency. Latency is the delay in when you start transmitting a message to where it actually gets to the sender. So there's a delay in the process, and very high latencies make communication very difficult. As you will recall, I mean, we have that right now in Zoom. There's a little bit of a gap. If that latency grows, then it makes it impossible to do many functions. You could have the fastest connection in the world, but if there's a latency associated with that fast connection, it's still not going to be functional. So there's no latency is not explicitly addressed in the last year's bill. That doesn't make last year's bill a bad bill. What it makes clear is that public PUDs in particular need to be vigilant in defining what we consider complying with the 2020 legislation and the 2028 targets. So those targets aren't just going to happen by themselves. Because we passed a bill last year doesn't mean that it's just going to happen in 2028. It means that we're going to have to be vigilant to deliver that target in a way that actually means something. So, and the whole PUD communities and the whole state is going to have to be vigilant in delivering what that legislation says. It's not just going to happen. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves in a few years being sorely disappointed with what's actually happening. So it just sets a target for our community. It doesn't actually do any of the heavy lifting. And that's the point I wanted to make on the telecom conversation. I took a lot of time on telecom. Just to say, obviously, I'm really happy about the work we're doing at the PUD on the waterfront. There'll be more to talk about in the future. What we're doing is really getting our ducks in order, and I'm happy about that. And then on the energy front, I had at our last general meeting, there was a couple of public comments, and particularly there was a public comment from Jill, who, what's Jill's last name? Christine, can you help me with that?
McIntyre Witt.
Jill McIntyre Witt, yeah, for some reason I forgot it. That led to a follow-up phone conversation and then a Zoom call that I did with Jill and I'm going to pull up her name, sorry. Cynthia Mitchell last weekend. And she is just sent to me by email some suggestions for a conversation to continue the conversation on municipalization and the study of municipalization. And I would like to have that brought up as a topic at a subsequent commissioners conversation meeting, something like the last meeting we did on telecom, where we can discuss what's going on and topics in the community. And then maybe that can result to some, to inform some agenda items coming up about a study. The folks at the city are still asking for a study. Folks in the community are still asking us for our involvement in a study to look at municipalization in all its forms. In some of those forms having nothing to do with the PUD explicitly, but certainly looking for our involvement in looking at those issues. So, I mean, that concludes my comment. There's one thing that I did want to address as far as an action, and that is the subject of a special meeting to talk about energy. And Steve and Brian, are we ready to schedule a special meeting regarding on the subject of energy supply yet?
Commissioner, I know that Brian has been working with TEA for a presentation on February 9th at a regular meeting. And based upon my discussion with Brian and been involved with just 2 of the presentations with TEA to staff over the last few months, my thought was that we would take the first presentation by TEA on February 9th, and then I think that we're planning on having a follow-up second presentation to the commission that would provide an opportunity for the commission to have some discussion around policy and program development. And so I was thinking that we would hold off on a special meeting, quote, on energy, at least until after the first presentation by TEA. But if the commission wants to have a general discussion around energy, as you did with broadband, last week, I mean, that's fine. And it might be an opportunity to give a little bit more direction to staff as to what you want to know that you don't know, or that will help you prepare for making decisions on policy and direction. So it's up to you, but when I laid out over the next 4 months, just a tentative schedule on presentations and special topics for regular meetings, I had the general quote, discussion on energy not until March, because I had tentatively planned it as a follow-up to those presentations by TEA. So
Great. So I would like to propose that to my fellow commissioners to do a conversation on February 2nd for an hour or so. And specifically, the reason I'm wanting to do that is because I feel like there's a lot that I can learn from Christine because of your background with energy and utilities. And we don't get to talk without being in a meeting. So I'm kind of wanting that. I'd like to check to see what the other commissioners think about that. And I would like to, Steve, give Cynthia Mitchell the opportunity to talk to the commission at the front end of that meeting for 10 minutes and as an educational item. And again, no action in the meeting, but it would be, and I when I talked to her this last weekend, she was open to the idea of that. And so I'm not sure if we need to do anything special for that, Steve.
well, I guess you need to have, I mean, you certainly can do that and have her make a presentation or comments. The question I would ask is that if you're going to specifically allow one individual to provide, presentation or discussion, are you concerned that you need to open it up for others? The last week's meeting, you very specifically did not allow anybody else to have any, provide any direct comments. And so this would, I guess I would raise that question.
That's a great point, because I don't want to, preferentially hear from one person or another. So maybe what we can do is we can leave time in the meeting and then allocate the time as is appropriate based on the people that want to contribute. With respect for, maybe a minimum of the typical public comment of a couple of minutes, up to maybe allow a little bit more time for people who have more in-depth comments. So let's think for a minute about that, how to phrase all of that. And Christine, you had something you wanted to say.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there will be quite a few people. I mean, I didn't go into everything in my commissioner's report, but I've definitely heard from others in the community, including the county's climate impacts group. And I think there are a lot of people that want to be heard on this topic. So I think finding a way to make that possible is good. And also just having something similar to the broadband discussion for the three of us to sync up a little bit more. It does seem pretty necessary. So we might need to do both.
When you say both, please clarify.
Well, I think that having our broadband discussion where we didn't have any presentations or public comment, where we simply got on the same page, was helpful for us moving forward. So it might be worth doing something like that again with energy, and then doing a longer session that involves some presentations and plenty of time for public comment.
I like that idea. Mike, can you weigh in? Mike might have stepped off for a second. I like that idea, Christine. And then if as appropriate in that conversation, then we can have follow up. Yeah.
February 2nd, Steve and I already have a meeting scheduled with on broadband with Gina at 9 a.m. So we would only have an hour if we did it at 8. Of course, time is the big challenge.
Right. I mean, I don't see that being a problem, keeping it to an hour. Let me just check while we're waiting for, I want to hear from Mike on this, Mike, as soon as you're back.
Commissioner, just a thought, and maybe Commissioner Grant is saying that.
Yeah.
Just having an hour discussion by the commission as to, okay, so what are issues, what are, what kind of input, what do you want to know that you don't know now, to be able to have that broader discussion with the community about energy. And that'll help us draw upon others to bring presentations or, at least, comments, suggestions, ideas on, how to address these issues on a broader scale. So, and give us have that hour discussion maybe on February 2nd, but then let staff work with you and with others in the community to say, okay, we need a 4-hour, public discussion around energy, and then develop that agenda and that opportunity.
So Mike, just to catch you up to speed, I know you had to step out for a second. I wanted to ask you, are you on board with a 1-hour discussion next Tuesday, February 2nd from 8 to 9 a.m., where we would have a similar, just a chat among commissioners with no public comment, for the purpose of kind of discussing the issues and getting on the same page amongst the commission.
I'm all for that, Altul. It's a good idea.
Great. So let's make that. So do we need a motion, Steve?
Yes,
So I'll make that motion to have a special meeting on February 2nd from 8 to 9 a.m. To discuss energy issues as they relate to the PUD. And I need a second.
I'll second it.
Okay, great. And all those in favor, say aye.
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 All right, well, thank you. So I think that concludes commission reports. So commissioners have any more items to report? So let's open it up for public comment then.
John Humphreys wanted to make a comment.
Great.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
yes,
All right, so
Yeah.
I just want to talk about SB. Thanks for listening to me in the first place. And I hope you guys are all staying healthy and doing well during the pandemic. I want to talk a lot about SB 5511. It's a bill that accomplishes looking good on paper, but because it is not specific enough, it is not actually going to meet our needs. And I want to throw a couple numbers out there first. In other developed countries like South Korea and Japan, most of the Nordic countries, gigabit fiber has been around for a long time. South Korea has virtually 100% fiber to the premises coverage for $24 a month for gigabit. In Chattanooga, Tennessee, it's 70. Chattanooga, Tennessee is offering 10 gigabit service for around $300 a month. So setting 150 megabit standard for 2028, which, as Commissioner Deschmont pointed out, will be very far behind the standard we actually need, is just really to appease telecoms for technologies that are not as efficient as fiber. So to have a real standard, it needs to include the cost. For example, in Chattanooga, they offer 50 megabit free connections for low income connections. We want to offer 100 megabit for free or less than $10 a month, which would be easy to supplement. And we need to have gigabit to each home, but we also need to define what our testing standard is. That connection testing standard needs to hold up for at least 10 minutes with less than 50 milliseconds of latency, because nobody that's having a serious meeting is having that meeting, or participating in telemedicine is having that meeting for only a couple of seconds. So by not defining, what the cost is going to be to consumers, what the time that the connection is going to perform for is, and the latency and the method available, wireless and satellite connections are not as reliable. So they're all backed up by fiber for that reason. So the method that is provided by is very important. You're really comparing apples and oranges and pears. If you want to compare wireless, satellite, and fiber to each other, fiber is simply the most reliable. It's also the most efficient. It's important to have an energy standard. What do we want our energy footprint to be as we start to address climate change with what telecommunications are? Launching Starlink satellites, for example, which are a much lower orbit and fall back to the Earth much more often. They launch anywhere from 6 to 20 satellites at a time. They have another rocket in development to launch more, but it takes 400 tons of rocket fuel for every one of those shuttle launches. And it's not nearly as good as fiber or reliable. So what do we want our energy footprint to be in relation to how we use technology as well? Fiber lasts for 100 years, and in the very near future, we're going to be able to have robots and things like that go into our conduit and repair the fiber. So right now we're saying 100 years, but it's very conceivable that within our lifetime, the maintenance on fiber will be greatly reduced as well. And it's not that high in the first place. I think looking at SB 5511, the last thing I want to talk about is there are a lot of things in there which are handouts to big telecom, in my opinion. There's a whole section that strengthens Washington's strange first service laws, which has earned us a red marking on the community broadband network map for having unnecessary barriers for public entities like PUDs to provide services. So looking at SB 5511, but then also looking at your hope for retail authority, I would say that you are going, as Commissioner Deschamps said, to need to be very vigilant, because looking at this bill, it looks like there's some pretty obvious big telecom influence. Setting the threshold too low at 150 megabits. What does the word available mean in the bill? Right, again, there's no time standard, no latency standard. If we put up a wireless transmitter that 100 people are using at the same time, but it theoretically, for a very short period during the day, can provide 150 megabits, will we consider that area served? And as far as that bill is written, yes. But the truth is, without real specifics, it will not be adequate and it will not meet our needs. So we should shoot for gigabit to every premises with the specifications I've sent before, less than 50 milliseconds of latency, 10-minute load test time, etc. That's what I had to say.
Thank you, John. Thank you for that.
Rick Merkel.
There we go, unmute. A couple of comments, perhaps John can comment on the first one, and that is, I was wondering about whether it's appropriate for the PUD to be taking action on items that are not on the agenda. And the second thing that I wanted to touch on was also broadband, and to point out that there is a reason why there are unserved and underserved areas. I happen to live in an underserved area. And that is because getting that super duper real fast fiber broadband into those areas is very expensive. And I think that the PUD needs to be careful about whether or not that is really ultimately going to be workable. Starlink is already up and functioning within the state of Washington in beta and running at speeds of in excess of 50 megabytes. They are continuing to build out that service. Ultimately, it will serve anywhere, and their ultimate goal, when it's fully built out, they expect to get to speeds close to 1 gigabyte with latency less than 20 milliseconds. And they're talking about that within the next year and a half. And I'm wondering if that isn't going to completely overtake the currently conceived technology, which is fiber optics. So just about the time that people are building out very large fiber networks to serve very sparse areas at very high cost, is that going to simply be obsolete by things like Starlink and others that are doing it by low Earth orbit satellite? And those were my comments.
Thank you.
John, did you want to address the?
Well, Commissioner, and for all the commissioners' benefit, when asked, it's not uncommon in public comment for a citizen to ask the board a question or ask the entity's legal counsel a question. I typically won't respond unless asked by the commission or the commission chair. It's your meeting.
Certainly, I'm more than happy to confer the question to you, John.
Okay, I'm just setting a protocol. The history has been, I don't just respond, I wait. If you want me to answer, you don't generally want to have a discussion between me and a citizen in this context. In this, I can answer Rick's question. This is a regular meeting, not a special meeting, so you can add matters to an agenda at any time. even after you've approved an agenda, the commission consented to this motion to, I believe that's what he's speaking to, the motion to support the retail service bill that Commissioner Grant was addressing during her, I think it was Commissioner Grant during her comments and Commissioner report. That's entirely appropriate. Something comes up, you want to act on it, you can do it during a regular meeting. If it was a special meeting, you could not do that. But a regular meeting, you can take any additional actions that aren't on the agenda. And this came up and the commission consented.
Thank you, John. I just want to address the Starlink issue. There's been the county executive, Rick, and others have put out statements about Starlink. And I want to just be clear that there is a substantial debate about the efficacy of Starlink as a standalone solution. And the technical answer is it's not. And the reason it's not is because Starlink depends upon fiber infrastructure for backhaul. So you can't get those speeds without having a fiber backhaul. And backhaul is basically how do you get the data from the satellite back to the rest of the internet. And so you need to have the better the fiber network, the more likely Starlink is to achieve those high throughput goals. But then the question is, well, then why do you need the satellites? And so there are serious concerns about Starlink, particularly as it relates to ecological footprint of Starlink, as it relates to energy and 1 gigahertz range waves. So, but it's certainly an important topic. It's being actively discussed at WPUDA, and I believe there's this presentation by folks who've researched Starlink at an upcoming telecom meeting. But I think Christine will be able to clarify on that.
Yeah, that is a topic that has come up, and there's going to be some other webinars about it too. So I'll try to, and it's something I've looked into a little bit, but I can share more information in a future commission meeting on that topic as I learn more.
Any more comments, Anne?
No, that's it.
Thank you. So with that, we completed public comment, and what we had discussed during the meeting was to adjust the presentation of the Open Public Meetings Act and Public Records training to the end of the meeting. And I just want to do a check-in with everyone here. Do we need to take a quick break before we begin that? And if we do, is 5 minutes sufficient for refueling? Is everybody fine with that? Okay, let's do that. Let's see, it's 9:48. Let's resume at 9:53.
Thanks.
John, I can't hear you. John, you're
I'm going to
muted.
share my screen now so I can get that set up. So you may come back to my opening page.
Okay, see you all in 5 minutes.
Wrong one. Darn it.
Okay, John, is everybody here?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well. Is Christine and Mike, are you all here?
I'm here.
Okay, let's have fun.
Okay, so thank you all, and I've done this presentation in various forms for a variety of groups, from the State Department of Commerce to fire commissioners, PUDs, ports, cities, and I always say it's an e-ticket ride. So we got a lot to cover in a short time, so I'll be going. And if you have questions, just let me know. And I guess from a background and framework, I've been working with municipal governments for almost 30 years. And so my comments on what's effective or what concerns are from that perspective of what makes a successful organization. And I would add that, you know, for my role as a counsel for a governmental entity, part of my role is to protect the commission, work with individual commissioners and staff. But as we get into other issues towards the end of the presentation, I would say, you know, I don't represent individual candidates, nor do I represent an individual commissioners on their personal matters as it relates to the elected office. So we'll get to that nuance later. So please ask questions as you have them, and here we go. So trying to make sure I can, here we go. Open government training. This is a requirement of the state law now, and we engage in this usually once a year, and you may get a duplicate kind of presentation from WPUDA or other groups. I'm sure you'll hear some of the same things. We'll be left with questions. You're required to take a refresher every 4 years, but the PUD has typically done this every year or two, and certainly within the first quarter of a new commissioner being elected. So a summary of my presentation, again, is going to be, you've seen a draft. We're going to cover some district authority, governance management issues, and then get into the open government training issues of Public Records Act, Open Meetings Act, and ethics, conflicts of interest. PUDs are authorized by the state legislature, and they're created by a vote of the people in the county. And this was done for this district many years ago. The district is a special purpose district, and that's important to recognize. It is not a general purpose government. It does not have those broad purposes the city or county has. And specifically, it only has those powers expressly delegated to the district by the laws of the state and fairly and reasonably implied from those grants. And some of those powers have conditions. For instance, sewer authority, which you do not have, this district does not have, is only, you only have that by a vote of the people. You would have to put that on election and have the voters approve that to have a vote of the engage in the sewer authority. But by an example, and we can, at some point, if you want, we can go into more detail on the extent of the authority, but you've discussed it a bit with broadband, and there's other circumstances that arise, and sometimes we have to look at that creatively. For instance, with our biodigester projects, you don't have authority to get into waste management, but you do in electrical generation. So we look at that and how is the project, how are we approaching the project, what do we fund, and the rest. And this is often an issue for an auditor when they come through on their state auditor if you're exceeding your authority. So we're generally very careful of how we approach these issues. Governance and management, and this is often an issue for commissions. And where's the right role of governance and where's management? These are expressly separate functions. In the PUD statute specifically, the legislature has said that management is within the district manager, as you are required to appoint a district manager, and that manager expressly is the chief administrative officer and controls all administrative functions of the district, but is responsible to the commission. So the commission's management, if you will, is through the manager directly, who is an at-will employee and has specific duties set forth and imposed, set forth in statute imposed by the commission. And importantly, you act as a body and no individual has any particular authority. The commission only acts as a body. And to make assure that the district can function in those realms, you have a delegation of authority resolution that you pass every review and pass every couple of years. And that's how the district manages and operates during the year.
Commissioner Murphy, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I'd say, John, can you talk about that management? Because it's always been an area I've felt that as a commissioner, I could walk into the building and talk to individual staff and kind of have them do what I want. You know, like ask them, will you look into this for me? Will you research this for me? Are you saying that that's not really the proper way, because the way it's written here, they oversee all administrative functions? So
the law is that the general manager is the chief administrative officer and is in control of all administrative functions. My caution would be, and it's a balance and work with your general manager, it's certainly more efficient, builds relationships. If you went to a staff member and said, hey, Dwayne, can you talk to me about the change orders of this last year? I'm just making something up. But it's careful is that now you could be perceived in that role as managing a staff person that the general manager manages. You know, are you being critical of how they approach the management of a job, which is really the general manager's function? So it's a delicate balance, Commissioner, and I would just caution that to work with your general manager and through your general manager. There hasn't been that I'm aware of any issues historically, but it's an area that's prone for problems. If it's abused or someone gets critical or starts questioning a decision of a staff, you might be undermining your general manager's authority, which affects culture of an organization and the efficiency of an organization to operate. So I wouldn't say you can't. That's a question to discuss with your general manager. What's the appropriate protocols for working through staff? Steve, did you have anything you want to add to that?
I just think it's always important that, and I think yesterday was a good example of that. Commissioner Grant had questions regarding, Brian's presentation today on NIS and others, and so she contacted me and said, asked if she could get information from Brian or from me before this morning's meeting. I sent that on to Brian. Brian immediately responded, and I think that's just and I think Commissioner Grant also had a question on something to do with the claims today. She wanted to know if she could contact Annette and ask questions in that regard. And that's the kind of keeping me in the loop, as to, well, what do you need to know and why do you want to talk to, one of the staff people? That's all I have ever asked. And I've never, with Commissioner Murphy on board for all my time at the PUD, I've never had a concern about his contacting any of our staff members, and I don't believe that any of our staff members have ever had a concern about making that contact directly. So I think it's really all about what John just said. It's just making sure that we have good communication between Commissioner and myself, and keeping staff in the loop to providing information to you that will help you make decisions. That's all we ask. And at the same time, respecting that line between management and policy.
So imagine your worst case scenario, Commissioner, that you had 3 commissioners who all spoke to staff on the micro level about different projects and gave different directions or different comments. How could staff function when the elected board was making managerial comments, if you will, that were at odds with each other? How you'd have a disruptive organization. So that's always can keep in mind the organizational context. Commissioner Grant, did you have a comment or just?
No comment.
Okay. So the elements of governance, this is kind of maybe a cheat sheet, if you will. We do an hour and a half presentation that covers all these areas for different municipal organizations. But we'd say as a commission, it's strategic, less tactical. you're more governance policy setting than management. Encourage you to respect the other commissioners and your managers and staff. And I think, the key thing, as I was thinking about this, the key thing about respect is listening to what people are saying. Look at your big issues. The key effective role of a commission that I've seen over 30 years is setting the strategic direction. And then the second one is managing to a budget. So, what the commission here a number of years ago started working on setting a strategic plan so that could inform the budget that you eventually approve. So if you think of it in sequence, you work on your strategic plan, you have your goals and actions or initiatives that you set out in your strategic plan that you want to see achieved. The general manager then develops a budget to implement that, and you approve the budget, and then you manage to the budget that you've set. And that's budget-based management. It's an approach. It's what the commission, I think, as Steve has worked towards. And then when you go for your general manager review, you have context of what to review. You look at the strategic plan, the initiatives. Has the budget been carried out and implemented? Are you achieving what you've set out as clear goals for the general manager? Now there's a context for review. And so from the governance perspective, that's often an effective way to achieve the commission's policy goals. And again, you focus on the why and the what, and not so much the how. You have an initiative, we want to accomplish X. You said, commission, Steve, we want to do this. Then Steve can come back and have a plan and how to implement that. It's part of the budget or needs a budget amendment. And then you can approve that implementation plan. And then Steve can carry that out. Steve?
I think that's so critical when these last few comments, because as we've gone through, going back now somewhat 4 years in developing our strategic plan and updating our strategic plan, this is the focus that we tried to bring to those discussions, is exactly that. You, the commission, adopt that strategic plan. You set the goals in that strategic plan, and then, as John said, then you turn to the general manager to say, okay, I recognize what your goals are that you've set in that strategic plan. Here's a budget that will allow staff and general manager to implement what we hear from you as your goals. And that is that's, I think, is absolutely essential, that we look at, as John said, that the budget is a management tool. It should reflect the policies and the goals that you, the commission, have set, but then check-in time, is with the general manager on an annual basis. Is that working or is that not working? I think that's the culture that we've tried to develop at least over the last 10 years.
And this affects the culture of the organization. And as you've all have discussed in the last few weeks, the variety of topics that might be on the table of initiatives that you may want to pursue, and how is staff being stretched? Does staff have the capacity? Is new staff necessary? How does that correlate to the budget? So you want to build opportunities for success in what these initiatives that are in the plan are. And these actions and how you approach this is really sets the tone and the culture of your organization. And it's something I would encourage you to be mindful of. And in this, try to commissions that are effective, whether it's fire districts, cemetery districts, ports, water districts, it's when the commissions find some alignment. And I think you're working through that on your special meetings, your workshops, to the extent you can avoid freelancing individual commissioners and work to identify the common goals and then pursue those. That's where they find the best success. And the overall mission, again, is get that job done. And the question is, what's the job? And that's rolls back to that strategic plan and budget, is from this approach to governance and management. I'm going to move on if there's any questions. Well, we'll go into Open Public Meetings Act. And so, this is the Public Records Act. Really the core thing that I would say is that we have a transparent culture of government in our state. This is liberally construed. The courts give wide berth to encouraging open meetings, open disclosure, and really transparent. And the phrase that's often used is sunshine brightens government for the people. And so these are initiatives that have been brought forward by the people. People do not delegate their authority so much that they give public servants the ability to know what's good for them and not good for them. The people have that. They have the chance to look at this and review what government is doing so that they may be informed. And what I would say is a key role of government is to disclose and be open. And it's when governments try to hide more than what is legally allowed, or is when you not only get in trouble under the law, but political trouble. And so in thinking about these, always think about your political bank account and what's your political capital and how it's being spent. So the OPMA, that's the phrase, Open Public Meetings Act. Applies whenever there's a meeting of the agency, elected officials to discuss agency business. And these are terms we'll have to go through. So you're a 3-person board, so a quorum is 2. So anytime 2 of you get together to discuss agency business, that's a meeting. And the agency business discussion occurs via email, text, video conference, telephones. And that's the perfect storm that's coming through technology. But it doesn't always apply. A social gathering where a quorum may be present is not a violation of the Open Meetings Act, as long as business is not conducted. Business, again, would be to having discussions. There's certain areas where by statute, the Open Public Meetings Act does not apply, and I try to give you some examples there. Interestingly, the way the statute are constructed is that a meeting regarding labor negotiations in certain circumstances is called a closed session and is not subject to the Open Meetings Act. We rarely will have that. But again, all meetings to the body are open to the public and persons are permitted to attend that meeting unless exceptions primarily for executive sessions. A meeting is where you take action, and action is broadly defined. And I always want to emphasize, physical presence isn't required. It can occur by phone. So if 2 commissioners spoke by phone, if you had an email exchanges, and we'll get into this on public records, and it's why we urge you not to use your personal email accounts or personal computers. And if someone is sending you something to a personal email account, you respond by your PUD email account, because if it happens to go to another commissioner and there's a response inadvertently, that could be a meeting. And because it could be a discussion of ideas exchanged in an email, and that can be very problematic, even if unintentional. So again, actions include discussions, deliberations, reviews, and we had the discussion, I think, in the last commission meeting or one of the last commission meetings. Well, what about attendance at WAPUDA? If I'm there, and I would say, if you're just receiving information, so if you can firmly sit on your hands and not say anything and just listen, then that would not be a meeting because there's no discussion. But once one commissioner is participating in the discussion and another one asks questions, I think you're starting to go over the line and get into the gray area. So be very careful. But also, there could be a perception of violation. It could be costly to your bank account. And so be careful about considering their political impact and appearance. If 2 of you consistently participate by attendance, but not by discussion, but just attend a meeting, it may not be a technical action under the Open Meetings Act, but you could be spending your political bank account. And a final action is when there's an actual vote on something by the commission, motion, resolution, and it must be taken in public, even if you had deliberations in an executive session. Secret ballots aren't allowed. We might take a poll, but it's not a final action. It's not an action on anything. And we can get direction on matters of how we're going to pursue an activity. A regular meeting is what we are having today. It's held in accordance with a periodic schedule that you establish annually at the beginning of the year by motion to resolution. And that schedule set for the year. You can amend that regular meeting. And if you do, that regular meeting schedule, and if you do, you have to then proceed and amend what's filed with the state office. And any regular meeting schedule resolution is filed that way by Ann. Special meetings. this is any meeting. It's not a regular meeting. So last week was a special meeting. Notice goes out in advance. It's written. It goes to all of you. The newspaper. It's displayed. It's posted on our website and provided to anyone who sought notice of any special meeting. And you must specify the time, place, and the business to be transacted. It's the final disposition on any other matters that aren't listed cannot occur. It's untested in the law whether other matters can be discussed. You see different people opining whether, well, we can discuss something that's not on the special meeting agenda as long as we don't take action. I would say it's best practice not to discuss matters that were not disclosed to public. I think the courts will look poorly on that. Back to our transparency in government. Public attendance is required to be allowed under the OPMA, but you are not required to provide a public comment period. That is just a decision that commissions or councils make. It's not required to be provided. An agency generally may not impose conditions on attendance. We'll talk about in a little bit. During this pandemic, the governor has suspended these rules. As the governor has authority, they've suspended these limits under the Open Public Meeting Act with the four corners of the legislature. And so that's why we are operating virtually and not in person and attending by virtual, not rather than in person. This is specific provisions that have been suspended. And in speaking, if someone who wants public comment doesn't want to give their name or address, they're not required to, but they can just speak. So executive sessions, this gets a lot of questions. It's limited to only those purpose. We set out the purpose of the executive session on the agenda. And then at the time it's announced, we estimate the time that'll begin and when it'll end. It can be extended. We ask to be precise about the purposes in the agenda. So what happens in executive sessions, stay in executive sessions. No officer, so that's general manager or commissioners or staff, may disclose any confidential information gained by reason of your position, which includes executive session materials. There's a penalty in the law, $500 or plus other similar criminal penalties that may be imposed. There could be grounds for forfeiture of your office. Those would have to take a court action and the court would have to order those. Forfeiture of the office, I've never seen that in any of my clients. I've heard of it in other jurisdictions, but it generally doesn't matter. But the key thing is that what happens in executive sessions, stay in executive sessions. It cannot be used for just personal issues or, hey, I want to talk to my lawyer. And there has to be actual or threatened litigation or matters that are financial or legal risk that we put ourselves at legal risk that we need to analyze in the context of potential litigation. It can't be done just to discuss negotiation strategy, nor if you had a board member vacancy that you wanted to fill, you can look at qualifications in executive sessions, but you can't do your interviews in executive session.
I have a question
Sure.
on the last one.
I'll go back.
Well, interviews, does that mean interviews with potential general manager candidates? Because the board is elected. The commission is elected.
The commission, so yeah, this was related to replacement of a board member in case there was a vacancy.
Okay.
If we're going to interview a general manager and there's two of you together, that would be a meeting. I'll have to go back to the statute candidly to confirm whether we can do that in executive session. My gut reaction is that interview would have to be an open session.
Okay.
To say that, I was being interviewed for a position once, and the three lawyers, we were all there, and they went, the commission, there was a parks commission, and they went into executive session. I said, I'm leaving. You can't do that. I'm not going to participate. They said, well, what do you mean? I said, that's a violation of the Open Meetings Act. And they said, oh, and so they said, well, okay, well, we're going to proceed in open meeting. And then they went and interviewed everybody. Lawyers, you interview lawyers, that's an open session. So I think the general manager would be an open session as well. You can do your reviews in executive session of a general manager, but your contract approvals would be in open session. I think your interviews would likely have to be in public, unless you did it one-to-one.
Okay, thank you.
These are the penalties that occur. So often questions are, can we change them or hold meetings outside our jurisdiction? Yes, you can change your locations. And what should you do if you believe a meeting or an executive session violates the law? I would say consult with me or your general manager, and let's go over that and have that analysis and see what remedies, if any, are applicable. Can you allow third parties into executive sessions? Yes, you can. There could be a situation where we want to bring in a consultant on a litigation matter to explain the technical aspects of something that might be better come from an expert than from me, for instance, as picking up a hypothetical. And you can give that direction to the manager or myself in executive session without taking a formal vote. And you don't really have the circumstances, but if you could imagine someone had a slip and fall on a sidewalk for a city and there was a lawsuit and we want to know what our settlement authority might be, we would get the direction from you, go negotiate that, and then the agreement would come back for approval in an open session. Just trying to put some context in that for you. Just a few other kind of be aware. Pre-meeting discussions, just chatting, may seem innocent enough, but it can be easily misconstrued by the public. Well, what are they talking about? What's going on? I heard them talking about something after the meeting. What's going on there? In-person serial meetings, we talk about this. I bring this up. You'll see this again and again because these kind of electronic or phone call meetings are where people get in trouble unintentionally. It's the exchange of the information or the email answer that violates the law, and you don't know what happens. It's easier to manage and control with a 3-person commission, but you can imagine a council or a 7-member city council or 5-member commission. It's the serial meeting where one email goes to another, and all of a sudden there's a meeting and no one intended it.
Can I get a little more clarification on this, John?
Sure.
With the electronic, so with emails, so, if a member of the community emails all 3 of us, we can reply to that member of the community, but we should just keep the other 2 commissioners off the email.
Yes.
Response.
And yes, that's what I would do, because the unintentional consequence is that you hit reply all, then another commissioner hits reply all, and then the community member comes back. And all of a sudden there's, in the exchange of emails, you can see a discussion.
Right. And then I read,
sorry, I just want to clarify one thing on that your last question, Christine. And that is, would it be appropriate to send a reply all that says, I will respond to you individually in accordance with open public meetings, and then reply so the other commissioner knows that you're responding?
That can be appropriate. I would caution that, yes, that's appropriate. Where I would just caution you down the road is that if one commissioner is responding, the other commissioner is responding, and what happens, and this is the problem of the perfect storm of technology, that member of the public with all good intention says, hey, Commissioner Grant told me this. What do you think, Commissioner Desmani?
That's why I was saying to be able to say that, hey, I'm going to respond to this, Commissioner Grant, rather than to respond not to Commissioner Grant, but to respond to the person from the public saying, I will respond to you separately because of open public meetings law.
Right, but what you don't want to, what can happen unintentionally is what I'm saying. Is the caution is that John Q. Public then replies back, well, Commissioner Grant told me this. What's your reaction? And now,
then we have to say I can't respond to that.
That person becomes the conduit. And at that point, you need to not respond. And I would let Steve know, and maybe Steve can help manage the response to the public.
Yeah.
I have one other question. I was reading our governance policies a few weeks ago, and it sounded like in my reading of that, well, I'll just ask you. So am I allowed to do kind of like an FYI only? For example, my meeting, if I get email updates with information on broadband grants. Can I forward that to the other two commissioners and Steve and just say FYI only, not wanting an exchange of information, but just one email in one direction?
Technically, I think that's allowed. The better practice is to go to Steve and have Steve disseminate that. But I would say that I do not think that that would be a violation, provided the rest of the commissioners don't engage and respond. And so there's a caution there that what the unintended consequence of what started. But yes, Commissioner, I think, I would send it. If you were to send it, I should say, I would say, please do not reply. You may be in the header, the information only. So that's information, so you're not engaging a discussion.
But it is appropriate to use the general manager as basically say, hey, Steve, could you make sure the other commissioners know about all these broadband grants?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's probably the best practice. But I would say that I don't think your individual email of just information, no reply, I don't think that would be considered a violation. But you create the possibility of a violation.
Okay. Okay.
And John, you may correct me here, but I see it as disseminating information, but not following that with a recommendation to take action. There's two different.
Yeah, that's more subtlety in what your email says. If it's just, hey, here's information from grants on broadband. When you start saying, I'm recommending that we take action at the next commission meeting, and now you're getting beyond just dissemination of information. You're expressing a position. If a commissioner responded to that, that'd clearly be discussion. So this is where, without having all the language of the email, you start creating the risk.
Okay, that makes sense.
Technology has all of its benefits, but it also creates these difficulties. So we get a lot of questions on COVID and Open Public Meetings Act. Are we ready to move on? Then I would say that the statutory framework, we've talked about this before. The governor's orders, back in March of last year, we were looking at matters changing weekly. The rules were changing almost instantaneously regarding how the meeting could occur. We're now having a suspension of in-person meetings. That's continued until the emergency's gone or rescinded. There's a statewide ban that's in effect, except for phase 3 counties. We are now a phase 1 county with the safe restart, safe opening. The numbers haven't gotten there. We hope that they will. We'll learn everything. It's every Friday we learn what status we're in. So we'll just have to wait and see. But everyone's adapted to, most entities have adapted to some form of electronic participation and made it as efficient as possible. So remote meetings, generally this is the rule, but we're kind of in our new world. If we do get into a phase 3 status, what our rules will be is the maximum number per people would be allowed by the county phase, separate by 6 feet, wear a face covering, and must have a room for all attendees, primary or secondary, and we must allow for remote attendance. If, for instance, your primary and secondary meeting locations to attend were overly full and couldn't meet, we'd have to adjourn, continue, or reset this likely as a virtual meeting. I know of some pending planning commission matters for a city that are on appeal that I represent the planning commission on. This could come up when this matter comes forward. It'll be interesting. Public Records Act. So the message here as we get into it is that everything you write down electronically or by hand regarding district matters is a record and is subject to disclosure. And I would, as I start, I would say, remember, don't put a note on the side that you would not be willing to see in the front page of the paper, or something about staff member or your legal counsel that you would not want to have out there. That John's looking particularly fat today doesn't really go well. So everything's a record, and be cautious about what you write down. And I say that because I have had a client had unintended matters come up in the front page of a national newspaper that they regretted later. The basic purpose is, again, the same, just like the Open Public Meetings Act, is that it's a free and open examination in the public interest. It's liberally construed, and as we'll get through it, this is very expensive on staff just to comply. It's expensive to the district to comply, but that's what the state has accepted, and it's expensive for a violation. There's our slide. Most claims against agencies are successful, regardless of intent of the agency. Penalties can be up to $100 per day per record, and these penalties are uninsurable. Means they come out of your coffers, not insurance. And the plaintiff is entitled to award attorney's fees if successful. And if we successfully defeat a claim, we do not get our attorney's fees from the requester. And they continue to accrue through each level of appeal. So if you won at the Superior Court and you lost on appeal and at a court of appeals, you'd have your attorney's fees could be owed to the plaintiff through that whole period. And there are attorneys out there who accept representation on a contingency basis. So it's no cost to the plaintiff on a requester if they're unsuccessful. They only are rewarded if they're successful. And there are lawyers who just do Public Records Act requests because they see it as an opportunity to catch agencies making an error and getting penalties and attorney's fees. A record is anything in writing containing information relating to government function or proprietary function. And it's any document. It's any form of recorded communications. So here's a long list. It's handwritten, text, electronic, video. People ask for megadata if they want to see everything that may have came through, and we may have to respond to that request. There are actions we can take, saying it's overly broad, it's unclear, try to be responsive to narrow the request so that we can be timely and engage in a reasonable search, but generally the courts will liberally construe the request. And they can include all your records on your home computers and not agency email accounts. So always use your email account. Avoid using your personal device or home computer or personal email. And all agencies should have an email retention policy, and we do, the district does. And we have policies on email use and use of personal computers to try to control that. And so we can manage the responses.
Hey, I have one quick question.
Sure.
So I'm of course trying to get all my business happening on my PUD email and phone. If I, get an email, obviously we live in a somewhat small community here, right? So if I get an email to my personal email account that's PUD related, should I just forward it to my PUD email address and then reply to the person then from my PUD email account? Is that the best way to?
That is
sure.
The best practice.
Okay.
And I would say, once it's on that, once you've gone through your PUD email account, we'll have it through the system and let the requester know, or the person know, that please use your PUD email account.
Okay. And then okay. Sorry, keep going.
Well, no, this is a fine discussion, so I'll
okay.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the same thing for phone calls. If somebody calls my personal cell phone and wants to talk about the PUD, I have been saying, let me call you back, trying to sort of get everyone focused on the fact that I'm using a PUD phone number and email account. So is that also a best practice then to
I think that's
try to move phone calls? Okay.
That's a best practice because in a digital age, we're getting more and more voicemail messages saved electronically. And if they start using a personal one, then they're going to say, well, we want to, I'll go through the parade of horribles in a moment. But it's a best practice to drive everyone to your personal phone. I used to use your PUD phone and away from your personal phone, largely because of voicemails. If someone calls you and you pick it up and you have a conversation, there is no record of that conversation. So that would not be a public record. If they leave a voicemail message, that is a record. And if it's,
Got it.
you could have to, that's why I would drive everyone to your PUD phone so that voicemails are left there. If you think of the parade of horribles, what we're trying to do is if we're in court and we have to argue, well, I'll get to this when we get to what our requirements are, but it's a reasonable search requirement that we have to engage in. So let me go through the procedure. You appoint a public records officer, and that's Ann Grimm, and she's certified. She's gone through all the certifications with the state to be a certified public records officer. So she manages this process with my office, and we have a partner here who oversees all of our public records responses that are of any magnitude. And we have a process of going through the exemptions and determining what's exempt or not, and what redactions we have to make from a record, because some information may be exempt, and we work through that. You've adopted rules and procedures to assure public access and to avoid damage or destruction, and try to maintain your regular agency functions. There's a fee process. You can limited fee recovery for some of your documents. And we provide a time for inspection.
John, I have a quick comment about the public records officer.
Yeah.
So from my understanding, the public records officer is as an officer is taking on a pretty substantial responsibility. And is accountable to the state, if I'm correct, to some degree, directly. And it's really important that we recognize that our public records officer is kind of like a czar as it relates to public records requests. And you know, we need to support our public records officer whenever a request comes in. Obviously, there've been lots of requests to the PUD, and the PUD has gotten used to over the years doing this very efficiently and very effectively. But it's just important to recognize that the public records officer is kind of in a bind if their team doesn't support them. So it's really important to provide solid support to the public records officer.
That's absolutely correct, and being responsive, and we'll talk about the search and how that goes about, how we go about doing that. We're not going to get into the micro details of that here, but Ann does an excellent job, maintains all the dates. She is certified by the state as a public records officer. She's an employee of the PUD. So, and so supervision by the state is assuring she has the regular training and updates, which she keeps up, and attends the conferences on a regular basis to stay current with the law, and works with our office on a regular basis on these matters for assuring compliance. And, you know, we draft letters and response letters or extension letters. And, you know, quite candidly, these letters are trying to give the requester information and speak to a court in case someone does have a challenge of our response. So I think I'll get to some of these as we get going through this. So the request must be for identifiable records. General information requests may not be a request for records. We don't have to manufacture a record to respond to a request for information, but only provide a record that exists. Sometimes we'll decide to say, you know what, rather than go back and forth, how easy is it to get that together? Because you're working with members of the public. It's, gosh, can we give that information? Is it hard to pull together? Well, no, let's just say it's not a record request, but here's the information, we've compiled it for you. It may be a public service to respond to the information. So we look at those questions, and that's what Ann kind of works through. We have forms, but we can't compel someone to use the form, but they must provide notice that they're seeking records. They can request to inspect records or request copies. We've had requests to inspect. We've had rooms set aside of documents to go look at, and then they'll be there for 30 days and no one comes by. And so we let the person know that we're going to close the room on a certain date unless they come by. But those things have happened. The process, so you know, is that we get a request that Anna has to respond in 5 business days and let them know that we've received the request, provide a time estimate for a further response or fulfill the request. We can provide an address or internet link to the records. We can seek clarifications. Oftentimes it's not clear what they're wanting in the request because they haven't, we want your water contracts with the farmers. Okay, well, what farmer? Which farmers? All farmers? Whenever the district has been since 1940? What is that? That seems overly broad. So are you looking for a time frame or particular farmers or particular regions? We try to get clarification. Or you can deny the request if you believe it's not a record or some reason for that. But we never really do that. We can ask for a further time, explain it must be reasonable, and there are various reasons why. Sometimes they ask for information that might be material or personal of another party, and we notify the other party. We had that in the last few years where it may affect someone else's rate information, and we said, well, we want to disclose it to the other party that they've made this request. We're going to tell them we're going to fulfill the request and provide the records, but you're going to have a chance to go to the court and seek an injunction to bar us if that's what you want. And so we kind of engage in a process through that. If we have an exemption from a request, like personal data or attorney-client privilege communications, we redact that information. We create a log of what's redacted on what record, under what the basis of that is, the exemption and the redaction. And that's a process required by law, and Ann does that with our team here. We can extend time and we can produce it in installments. And that often happens when there's a large request, we go through installments. And it could come by saying, we've already received some staff members' responses. We'll package those up and respond. And then we wait till we try to work through everybody else's. So what our search is, we need to know what we're looking for, and we develop a game plan, and Ann does a great job of doing that. She determines how we're going to collect the request, make the request, and how to follow up. And we ask the commission, if it's commission records that are being sought, to search your systems. And if we got into this, is where Christine, to answer your question and give you an illustrative example, we have policies, and we ask you all to use just your PUD facilities. And so if we had someone seeking, well, I want to look at Commissioner Murphy's desktop hard drive because I think there's more records, we don't want to just say, oh, here it is, go look at it, it's a fishing expedition. We try to say, no, that's not reasonable. Our reasonable search as a district is to say we have a policy. He's not allowed to do it. Commissioner Murphy, have you abided by that policy? Have you ever used your personal emails? Have you searched your computer for your personal emails? Yes. And maybe we go further, say, have we had Mike McCumber search your personal hard drive and found no personal emails? Depending upon the nature of the request and the sensitivity of what's on your hard drive, we can go to different levels. And then we go to the court, we say, we've done a reasonable search. We don't need to do more, Your Honor. And they're just looking at a fishing expedition and wanting to get into Commissioner Murphy's personal business. That's not appropriate. We've done a reasonable search. And we may go to court before we respond to get the court to tell us that. That's the hypothetical situation, but we try to build in layers, is what I'm saying, of reasonable actions that we've done to create that adequate search. We followed a game plan that Ann established as a certified officer that was designed to consider all formats, all records, retrieve them from their possible locations, and provide those non-exempt records to the requester.
John, can I interrupt?
Sure. I'm sorry to your example, Mike. But...
No, that's good. You made me think about how often that has happened over the few years where Ann has called out to the commissioners and said they have a request and asked the commissioners to check on their own computer or iPad that we use now. So yes, it does come back to us individually as commissioners. We have to go back and research, and then we have to respond to Ann's request. Do we have anything? And if we do, we have to send it to her. If we
Right.
don't, we can say we don't. I just want the other two commissioners to be aware of that.
That's correct. And that's the process we engage in so that we can prepare the declarations. If someone went to court and sued us on a Records Act violation, we can say, no, we conducted an adequate search. These commissioners said they did these things. There's no reason not to believe them. This is the policy. They've been trained. We've done the district has done everything it can. It's done a reasonable search. And we think you're on a fishing expedition at this point. That's what I'm conveying. So again, it must be the research must be reasonably calculated. We must look to obvious leads to possible locations. We bear the burden of proof to show the adequacy of the search, and that's why we're building all these layers of what we do. Again, exemptions are, all records are presumed open. The exemptions are narrowly construed. And we have to provide a log of what's exempted and why, and usually it's a redaction. We provide the full email, but black out that information that may be exempt, your social security number, if it's, or something, attorney-client privilege communication. Common exemptions are protected health information, pending investigations. There are deliberative process, preliminary plans. Those type of things can be held out from a request under certain conditions, circumstances. Penalties again are up to $100 a day per record. And the court can group those together and they can get attorney's fees. The court will award those attorney's fees to the requester. There's no damages, however. Again, we've talked about it. The public records officer is the pro, PRO, and is a certified pro. She's the point of contact for public and responsible for agency's compliance. And I think, and as we've said, puts together the plan and carries out and implements all the responses, works with staff, the agencies, the commissioners for compliance, and works with the public and does a very fine job. Just reminders, again, if it involves district business, it's a public record. If we get into difficult areas of blog posts, Twitter accounts, web pages, if you're making blog posts about district business, Twitter account messages, those are all records. So be careful and work with your social media. And so it'll be interesting when we have the social media consultant, how we work this to manage our records. And again, the content concerns, I would just say the public's always listening, so be careful what you write. And the recent trends, its ability to search massive amounts of data quickly. It's people ask for metadata, which is the bits and terabytes that might be in a message to try to search for everything. And we're just seeing more and more broad-based searches as a result. And it's getting into social media, so be cautious and careful. Okay, we'll move to ethical issues. And I think what I would I like to start out this portion by just saying, reminding what my law professor in ethics told us is that if you have to ask the question, you know the answer. Most people have a gut, and if you have to ask the question, you likely know the answer. So in ethical issues, it's usually unthinking actions that occur. And commissioners don't recognize the issue, don't think about it, or they say, gosh, that was never my intent. But I would say, what you think about your intent of your actions may have little relevance from another person's perceptions or the court's. You can't think I can justify my actions and therefore it's ethical. And it's important that these actions set your tone for your organization. And remember, the staff and the public are always watching. So we'll get to the technical issues here. Conflicting financial interests. No municipal officer may secure privileges for yourself or your others in your family by virtue of your position. You cannot directly or indirectly receive compensation through your actions as an officer. unless it's provided by law. You can't accept employment or engage in a business that you might be expected to disclose confidential information required as a result of your position. Nor, as we discussed before, can you disclose that confidential information. That's part of the Municipal Ethics Act. Conflicting financial interest. Our Supreme Court has held that a city's perspective, the same would apply to a commission, that a council member may not vote on a matter where he or she would be benefited by the action. And so not voting here is simply not a remedy. The self-interest of an action would infect all the other members of the entity. So we'd have to discuss the circumstance and to see whether leaving the room is an option or what the remedies might be. This is the Municipal Ethics Act language. No officer, as I said, may be beneficially interested directly or indirectly in any contract. You know, I've had a city that had a council member they were looking to appoint whose spouse was a member of a union, and that council member would effectively be voting on the union contract, the collective bargaining agreement that their spouse would be benefited by, so that council member would be indirectly benefited by. And he said, you know, well, they're going to have to step away in every case whenever these matters come up that affect the compensation of their spouse, and they elected not to appoint that person because they felt it'd be so problematic. There are some exceptions on remote interests. You know, if you're a non-salaried officer of a nonprofit, they encourage people to be engaged in the community, and other circumstances typically won't apply here. But we would discuss that if there came up with a question. If there was a remote interest, there are certain things you'd have to do that would take you through those steps. The penalties for a violation of the Municipal Ethics Act are $500. Any contracts were approved could be declared void, and it's possible forfeiture of office. There's a judicial doctrine of incompatible offices that essentially is you cannot be loyal to two parties that are in conflict or potentially conflict. The question is, where does an official's duty of loyalty lie? So you may hold two or more public offices unless they're incompatible, and you have to look at the nature and the duties of the office as to whether it's improper to retain both. And so the question is, you know, where do your duties lie? If you think you have to ask yourself if you're competing duties, and if you have to ask a question about that, maybe you've answered the question, but you have to look at where the duties of the loyalty lie. You cannot have competing duties. A duty to more than one is a duty to none, and to put it another way. No, it does not come up with the PUD that often because we're not involved in leasing and selling property so much, but just so everyone's aware, there is a prohibition on gifts and lending of credit in the state constitution that we cannot, you have to lease property at fair market value. Rent offsets have to be determined to value in the fair market to get a rent offset. You have to sell property at a fair market value, those type of things. We're getting into some of the questions, Commissioner Deshmani. Appreciated the email in advance so I could just tune myself up on this. But I would say, you know, when we talk about lobbying and use of public facilities, we have to distinguish campaigns versus initiatives, which is, you know, measures of the people are voting on, and then lobbying of pending legislation. So we'll try to walk through some of this, and the rules are not always a model of clarity, and there are nuances. But you cannot use public facilities for any promotion or opposition of any ballot proposition or any campaign. There are exceptions. Is that you can take action at a public meeting of an elected legislator to express a collective decision on an initiative or a ballot proposition. And so that's important here. We're talking about a ballot proposition as opposed to a proposal in a legislature. If it was a ballot proposition, you'd have to provide both sides an opportunity to speak to it. And then you can take a action in support or opposing that, and then you can have a fair and objective representation of facts on that ballot proposition. I have not seen that come up with the commission. That comes up with cities, general purpose government more often. I was asked about the lobbying. I'll go, so lobbying does not include, if you're asked to make a report to a legislator expressly, where you've been asked to provide specific information, that's not a lobbying response. If you're engaged in a telephone conversation or prepare written correspondence, that's not lobbying. If you're having, this is where it gets nuanced, you can prepare and adopt policy positions and send those in like you did today. That's not considered lobbying. In-person lobbying on behalf of a district of no more than 4 days or parts thereof during any 3-month period, and in-person lobbying by elected officials is okay. That's 4 days, 3 months a year by the agency. You cannot expend more than $15 during that 3 months in doing so. That's the nature of the lobbying. You cannot use your, generally speaking, if you're looking at lobbying, I'd have the conversation of what's going on with the district and with Steve. You're going down on a PUD day down at the legislature to talk to everybody. That would be okay. It's likely part of those 3 days, it's 4 days and a quarter. But you have to be careful and monitor that.
Okay, so can I ask some clarifications about that?
I'll try to do my best here, yeah.
Okay, so the 4 days, do they apply for state and federal?
Yes.
So you've got a total of 4 days. If you're going to go to DC, you spend 2 days in DC maybe, and then you only got 2 days left to lobby Olympia.
During a 3-month period. Oh, okay. So let no more than that. Let me read the statute in that context. That's a good question. 4 days or any parts of it during a 3-month period. I think you could distinguish the federal versus state legislature under the statute.
Okay, so this statute's only referring to a state legislature then?
It says of any elected official on behalf of the agency, and then it's legislature, state elected official.
Yeah. So there may be different rules.
I'm looking at this quickly. This is a very precise question, so I'm trying to be accurate. And I think it would distinguish between federal and state legislation. But
Okay,
I'll
yeah.
get a more firm answer for you, Commissioner.
Right, and there may be other rules for federal.
Yes.
The $15, could you clarify what that's all about?
Yeah, it's total expenditures of non-public funds made in connection may not exceed $15. You can't put more than $15 out of your own pocket in this expense. It all comes back to then what you report to as a lobbying activity. Total expenditures of non-public funds made in connection with such lobbying may not exceed $15 for any 3-month period.
So does that mean it's really important to not buy myself dinner when I'm going to Olympia?
Not to buy the legislator dinner.
So my basic needs, meeting my basic needs of housing and food is okay. It's just that I can't use money for buying a legislator anything over $15 during 3 months.
Yes.
Basically 3 cups of coffee safely.
Yeah, yes, of your personal funds. Think of it, we're trying not to let the fat cat sit there and say, well, I get paid a salary of $500,000 and I'm going to go use my personal money to lobby the legislature, and I'm going to get around I'm not using public funds, I'm using my personal funds. So this is the limit. If you exceed it, you're lobbying and you're having to report.
Understood.
I've got it. So this is Christine. So what is lobbying exactly? I mean, it is a conversation, for example, with Drew Hansen about his Public Broadband Act and like how that's going to impact I mean, is learning more about proposed legislation, is anytime you talk to a lawmaker lobbying?
Potentially, I'm pulling it up here. I had it on my screen to be ready here. Any attempt to influence the passage or defeat of legislation or adoption of any rule. So if you're just getting an education, and this is a subtlety, is that, tell me about your proposal. That's arguably not lobbying, but if you want to start influencing it, well, I think you need to address these issues. Well, now you're lobbying.
Okay, one more question. I mean, with these days.
You're attempting to influence the passage or defeat. If you're just trying to put content in there, but not saying, it should be defeated unless you take this. There's a lot of nuance here.
Okay, so I have a 15-minute phone conversation with Representative Hansen. Is that one day?
Yep, any part thereof.
So so I should really make the most of my day. And that's every 3 months you get 4 days.
Yes, in-person lobby, it's well, maybe back up. You said telephone conversations. In telephone conversations would be excluded, but in-person lobbying on behalf of the agency.
On behalf of okay.
Now, that raises a separate issue. We got to go back to our governance. You don't speak, the agency hasn't spoken unless it takes a position. So you're down there speaking on your behalf as a citizen, you can do that.
Right. And we're still allowed to express our views on things if we make it clear that we are acting as private citizens, not in our role as PUD commissioners.
Yes, but I would just be cautious about your political bank.
Okay.
Because the public may not always perceive that difference.
Okay.
So just to be clear, a great example would be this motion we just passed. If I go and testify in Olympia in support of this retail authority law, I would be using one of my days.
I've tried to look at that and discern that, and in this statute, and I think you're at that risk, yes.
I should treat, a conservative approach would be to count that as one of my days. So, thank you for that.
One more question, John. It's pretty common, different organizations reach out to elected officials and say, will you support, X, Y, and Z bill? And what's our policy on that as a PUD?
I don't believe Steve can chime in. I don't believe the PUD's taken a policy about what an individual commissioner might speak on their personal positions or a position as a commissioner on a particular state legislation. You cannot say it's the commission unless there's been a motion or resolution to that effect. But I don't believe this commission has ever taken a position that would limit a commissioner saying, my view as a commissioner is this.
John?
Yes, Mike.
My experience has been, is even when I have spoken as a private citizen on things, and people know that I'm a commissioner, I'm always surprised how often they come back and say, well, Commissioner Murphy feels this way. I've never introduced myself as a commissioner in this meeting. I've always said, this is what Mike Murphy feels. I find that the public seems to wrap our political position into our private life, and a lot of people don't separate the two. Any feedback on that?
That's why I say be careful of your political bank account, because I think once you know perceptions can be reality, and people's comments are believed to be a position of a commissioner, even if we say, oh, I'm only speaking in my individual capacity. My observation has been that isn't always heard.
So one more technical question, Sunday school question, I'll call it. asking for clarification, John.
I am
And
trying.
that is when someone lobbies me. Okay, of course, this good example I can give is on adjudication. Many different people from different parts of the community lobbied me to for us to take a slightly different position on the adjudication letter that we submitted. When they're lobbying me, does that count as my day or my time?
No,
I just want to make sure of that because
for the lobbied, not the lobbyist in that situation.
yeah, okay. I just want to make sure. So in context, if a legislator contacts me from Olympia and asks me to comment on something, I'm not lobbying them. I'm just answering questions, right?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, one more question, John. So what is, if there are more bills, at the state level that we think are important to support as a commissioner, as we're learning about them in, the energy and telecommunications, WPUDA committee meetings, it sounds like the most transparent way that we can do it is much like we did today with the motion to support the House bill on public broadband, is to say, hello, fellow commissioners, here's a piece of legislation that I'm interested in us supporting for X, Y, and Z reasons, so that we talk about it in a public meeting and then we are unified in our decision to support it. Is that true?
I think you're speaking of a good practice. And I think, just what you might do on your agenda is add a section called legislative update. And so that the public is aware that you're going to get an update. And if there's an update and you want to take an action on it, you may.
Okay.
So that they know there's a legislative report and you may be taking a position.
And then is us as a commission deciding to take a position on an issue like that, does that use up our days?
No.
Okay.
That's an in lobbying on behalf of an agency with this state agency officials. If you're trying to meet with a state representative or the governor, that is obviously one of your days. And understand, we get beyond these things, we're getting into more of a reporting requirement, and there's ways to approach that, but we'd have to work with the Public Disclosure Commission and how we're going to go through the lobbying process. And we haven't had to do that in the past. And you may end up saying, well, we're going to work through a lobbyist to do that.
Okay. Thanks.
So we're on the ethical issues really, and as we're just talking about, everything is an ethical issue, and it's nuanced, it's difficult. We're going to, every hypothetical you have to think through. I don't like just kind of reacting here. So if I go through this, I come up with a different thought, I'll put together a memo. I just would caution that aside from the technical issues, every perception of a violation is assesses your political bank account in some fashion. And I think one of the things the commission historically has worked hard at is kind of protecting its political capital so that it's used carefully for your strategic goals and not spent unintentionally on other issues. Not being transparent or having ethical questions can undermine some of your strategic initiatives. And the commission historically has been very conservative about protecting that bank account. So my other observations, successful commissions, keep in mind that success has the unintended consequence of building complacency. So always be mindful of the ethical issues. Don't have a cultural lapse. Always ask, why are we doing this? And I just would say everyone believes they're ethical, but something happens unintentionally. So the good practice can be, if you have to ask the question, you know the answer. That's the maybe esoteric approach. So your big issues are misuse of public funds or assets. Remember that everything of the district has value. Avoid the violation of the Open Meetings Act, and Steve, Ann, and I are very careful in working with you on that. You try not to direct a staff to help somebody specifically, or, you know, would you help with my pet project? It hasn't gone to the commission. That's where you get into ethical issues. Why is it a pet project? What's the relationship with this customer, quote unquote? Try not to mix the business with political business. Mishandling public records. Off-color jokes, hugs, or something similar is gets people into problems. The informality of our personal life into our public community life can be problems. And that's just the hugs, and I'm not condoning the others. If there is a concern about an allegation of misconduct, assume there will be an investigation either by the district, public, or the state auditor. In most employees, how could they even think that about me? I acted ethically. It's the post-act rationalization. But an investigation often is beneficial. It serves to protect the district, the commissioner, or the employee. And if we get an allegation of misconduct that rises above any modest level, we would likely notify our insurance company for potential coverage of in an event there was a validity to the claim. So that was it. I'm not sure how long that took, maybe an hour-ish. There's a lot of nuanced questions on lobbying, and this is quite frankly the first time I've added a lobbying component to this presentation, so I appreciate that. It's always good to bring something new. And are there any other questions? And I'll try to end the screen sharing.
So yeah, I want to thank you, John, for preparing this presentation. I'm really glad as a organization, the PUD, and then of course, in addition, WPUDA makes this education a real priority. It takes, you have to see it a couple times for it to sink in. So I'm glad, even for those of us who've seen it before, to see it again. So thanks for doing that.
So just in my wrap up, I would just tell you, I represent the commission. I don't represent Steve. Steve is your general manager. So if you have any issues or questions, you can contact me. I would tell you, as Commissioner Murphy and Deshmani will know, I will say I represent the commission. I can't represent you individually, but I can address your questions in the context of the district and the commission. And we work through that and try to be responsive. As always, I serve at the pleasure of the commission. I will have a certificate for you at the next meeting that you completed this training. That will be your parting gift next meeting.
Hey, can I use that certificate and forward it to the county for planning commission then?
Yes, you could.
Hey, two birds. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Christine, you'll need that for the EDI board. So when we get their certificate, I'll pass that along to them.
Okay, great.
Any other questions, or if you have questions that come up following, let me know.
Well, thank you so much. And Ann, thank you for being our pro.
Most welcome.
And she's saying that today. There are days when that's difficult, isn't it true? Well, anyway, thank you all. Is there any other pressing business for the PUD today?
I just one last comment on John's presentation and discussion around not just the Open Public Meeting Act, but the public records. You know, I can't underemphasize the work that Ann has done over the last several years in meeting some really weird and I'll just say very significant records requests and responding to that. But I would also say that it really is a team effort. we look to John and his other partners to provide us the support that we need. And it's also a team effort in terms of other staff members and maintaining their records, especially the last few years in terms of the virtual records request. I mean, it really takes a team effort. And we've gone in the last 5 years, we've gone through some significant records request response. I think we had one, a couple years ago that was over 3,000 copies of memos that also provide an opportunity to work with some federal agencies on that. And just a big thank you to John, his partners, and Ann and our staff, not just on the records request, but on the open public meeting. I mean, it's a daily working together to make sure it works. So thank you.
I guess on the public records, Mike might recall this. It was pre my involvement with the PUD as counsel. I think there was a request where the district did get hit with a $25,000-$30,000 penalty in a failure to respond to requests from a company that was at issue with the PUD on some efforts the PUD was taking. And those public records requests are sometimes they scored by folks. They're not just looking to disclose, they're looking to have it used as discovery in anticipation of litigation. And if they're not responsive, they'll use it to punish. But that's okay. I think the attitude is always, it's okay, because part of our job of government is to be open and transparent. If you can accept that as a principal job of government, is to make sure that we function openly and transparently as the best we can, then it's not an issue.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order? Then I'd like to call this meeting of the PUD to close. We will see you all in a week for a special meeting for conversation on energy. And otherwise, our next regularly scheduled meeting will be the 9th of February. And thank you all for a productive morning.